All right, I declare open this hearing of the Senate Select Committee on Supermarket Prices. I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today or who are watching today. These are public proceedings being audio streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I'm joined today by Deputy Chair Senator Sterle and also Senators Cadell, Tyrrell, Kovacic and Pratt. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses have a right to request to be heard in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Commonwealth officers appearing today are reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. A copy of the order is available from the Secretariat. I remind everyone present that mobile phones should be switched off or turned to silent. There are representatives of the media here today. I would like to advise that representatives of the media have requested permission to film and take photographs of the committee's proceedings, and the committee has agreed to this. I remind the media that this permission can be revoked at any time, and the media must follow the direction of Secretariat staff. If a witness objects to being filmed or photographed, the committee will consider this request. The media are reminded that they're not able to take images of senators or witnesses' documents or of the audience. Media activity may not occur during suspensions or after the adjournment of proceedings. Copies of Senate Resolution 3 concerning the broadcasting of committee proceedings are available from the Secretariat. I now welcome Mr Banducci, representing the Woolworths Group. Information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appeared today?
I'm Brad Banducci and I'm the CEO of Woolworths.
Thanks, Mr Banducci. I now invite you, if you wish, to make a short opening statement, after which the committee will have some questions for you.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of Woolworths, I welcome the opportunity to appear before you, and I hope I can help the committee understand the key drivers behind grocery inflation. As we sit here today, we have lived through a very tumultuous 5 years, with COVID-related disruption, followed by rising interest rates, in a period of sharply inflated inflation over the last 2 years. While at Woolworths, we're now seeing falling rates of grocery inflation. Nevertheless, we understand that many of our customers are under immense cost of living pressure. This is primarily due to rising mortgage repayments, rent and transport costs, which have all gone up in double digits. Grocery represents 10% of household income, and grocery prices have gone up by a compound annual growth rate of 6% over the last 2 years. And we have a key role to play in helping our customers find ways to spend less on their groceries and getting the best possible value in very challenging circumstances. Throughout this recent inflationary period, we have taken and continue to take steps to provide affordable grocery products for all Australians. These include holding our own brand products at everyday low prices across pantry essentials, compelling weekly specials, a best unit price search filter on our digital platform, and donating more than 34 meals to our food rescue partners in the 2023 financial year. Woolworths is a proud Australian company. Our first store opened in the Imperial Arcade in Sydney on the 5th of December 1924. And this December, we will mark our 100th year serving Australian communities. Well, with success in the last 100 years, and indeed in the years that lie ahead, has been based on providing a strong focus on providing real value for our customers, meaningful employment for our team, and treating our suppliers and other stakeholders fairly. We are Australia's largest private sector employer and a vital participant in regional and rural communities. We seek to work in partnership with suppliers to develop our collective business and play a critical role in building resilience in the Australian grocery supply chain. We support Australian retirement income through superannuation funds and provide an important source of income through dividends for over 350,000 Australian retail investors. Given a key focus of this inquiry is the degree of competition in the supermarket sector, I'll provide a very brief summary of our view on this. In short, we are part of a highly competitive, efficient and innovative grocery sector. In 2008, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission determined that the industry was workably competitive, and now it is much more so. With the arrival and growth of three of the world's biggest and most competitive retailers, Aldi, Costco and Amazon, in Australia, consumers have never had more choice, and this is a good thing. In this context, it has never been more important to be price competitive. It is critical in trying to win our customers' shopping basket, which we need to do on a daily and weekly basis. Australian consumers are savvy and have high expectations. The vast majority of consumers shop across multiple retailers. The growth of online shopping and new digital tools are making it ever easier for consumers to compare prices and cross-shop. That doesn't mean the consumers are finding it easy to make ends meet. Grocery inflation is real and has been substantially driven by cost increases from our largest global consumer goods suppliers and the cyclical impacts of domestic fresh food markets. It is important to note that our top 100 suppliers have driven over 60% of our overall grocery inflation. But as I mentioned at the outset, I'm pleased to say grocery inflation is falling, and we all need to continue to work together to ensure this continues. Grocery retailing is a high-volume, low-margin sector, and Australia has one of the most efficient and productive grocery sectors in the OECD. We make a reasonable profit, both a 10% return on funds employed after tax, and also a 10% total shareholder return over the last 5 years. And as I said earlier, much of this goes back to our Australian households in the form of superannuation and dividends. We also make considerable investments back into our business so that it is more resilient, innovative and efficient. I look forward to answering any questions the committee might have. Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks, Mr Banducci. I'll kick us off. We've heard abundant evidence through this inquiry, which is now drawing to a close. And I just want to put to you a synopsis of the evidence that we've heard and ask you for a response. Your company, alongside Coles, enjoys a market domination of Australia's supermarket sector, a sector which has far less competition than comparable markets overseas. In the past decade, you've used this market dominance to put the squeeze on your suppliers, including farmers, to force down wages, to compromise staff safety and to price gouge your customers. Countless Australians are skipping meals, dumpster diving and eating less healthy food because they can't afford to buy food and groceries. You've thrived in a weak regulatory environment, you've engaged in anti-competitive behaviour, and you've convinced large parts of this parliament not to rein you in. With all the evidence that we've received, how can you possibly deny that you are using your market dominance to do over farmers, to do over workers, and to price gouge your shoppers?
Senator, as per our submission and my introductory comments, we disagree with that position. This is an incredibly competitive market. To have almost 600 Aldi stores now in Australia and the material growth of Aldi since 2002, one of the world's leading hard discounters in the market. To have, in addition to that, Amazon now with a very material position, closing in on somewhere around $6 billion of gross market value in terms of the revenue it does. To see the reporting of Chemist Warehouse and their $8 billion of revenue, which is part of the market we compete in personal care. Indeed, to see the Bunnings numbers and how we compete with them in household care and pet. Never mind the vibrancy we still see in the independent sector, and indeed the number of stores in the independent sector has grown over the last couple of years. I would respectfully submit that this is an incredibly competitive market, and that is good for consumers. In addition to that, if you look at our numbers, and we've submitted many numbers in many documents, and I'm happy to talk through them today, you will see a business that makes a 10% return on capital. And in the stock market, over the last 5 years, as per my introductory statement, we made a 10% return on shareholder on TSR, which is the average for the Australian stock market over that period. In the face of all of those facts, it's very hard to say that we are price gouging. In addition to that, very importantly from my perspective, I'm not saying that consumers aren't doing it tough, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do more to help them, which we do. And the reason I'm here, and we are very constructive in everything we would like to engage on, is because good will come out of these processes, and we intend to take learnings and actions back into our business as we should. So we all have a role to play in helping consumers. The positive, per my introductory comment, is that we do see inflation coming down, and there is incredible value across our store and across our competitor stores. And our role is to make sure we provide that value accurately for our consumers. So I sit here today constructively engaging on the topic of how we help Australian consumers get real value from their grocery shopping. It is an incredibly important part of their lives, as you rightly point out, and we all have a critically important role to play in that process.
All right, thank you. Can you remind me, Mr Banducci, how much net profit Woolworths made last year?
Senator, you will see when we talk through the net profit after tax, it was $1.7 billion after tax. But if you'd also permit me, given the nature of this issue, to just talk through that number, because big numbers can look deceiving in the context of our business. As you would be aware, that number turns out to be about 2.7 cents in every dollar spent with us. Our overall sales are $64.3 billion for F23, which is the right numbers, I think, to anchor to.
I mean, we understand you're a low-margin, high-turnover business, Mr Banducci. The committee is well aware of that.
And what's key in that, of course, Senator, is that we rely on our customers. They're our lifeblood for us to be successful. Oh. If we do not get sales, if we do not generate value for our customers, they don't shop with us for the whole or part of their basket. And so that is the key for us. And in the current market we're in, delivering value is critical on a daily basis, a weekly basis, to enjoying the privilege of the customer of our customers.
So you made $1.7 billion in net profit. What was the average size of your equity base in that financial year?
Can you just clarify the question, sorry, Senator?
Well, I'm after your ROE, your return on equity here, Mr.
The
Banducci.
return on funds employed, or which is the way to look at the return on it, was just over 10%. I think it's 10%
in the last financial year.
Over the last financial year post-tax, Senator. Yes.
The return on equity? The
return on funds employed, which is the right measure to look at, given the overall return.
I'm asking you about return on equity. There's a range of measures that are accepted to determine the profitability of a company, and I'm asking you about an accepted measure, which is return on equity. So could you just address the question, please?
Senator, the numbers we always look at are our return on funds employed.
I'm not interested or asking you about the numbers you look at. I'm asking you about the numbers that the committee is interested in, and that at the moment is return on equity. I'm happy to talk about those other numbers later. I'm asking you for your return on equity in that financial year when you made $1.7 billion in profit.
Senator, that would be available in our annual report. I can only talk to the numbers that we focus on and we measure our business on, which is the commonly agreed which is return on investment. How much money do you put in and what return do you get out?
Return on equity is generally what investors look at to determine the profitability of a business, Mr. Banducci. I'm asking you about return on equity. I'm going to put it to you that the average size of your equity base in that financial year was north of $6.6 billion, which makes your return on equity in the last financial year about 26%. Would you agree with that?
Senator, the measure we use is return on investment.
Mr. Banducci, please, I'm not interested in your spin here today. I'm interested in you responding to the questions that you are being asked, and I'm asking you about return on equity, please.
Senator, with due respect, we look at return on investment,
Mr.
which
Banducci,
is the key measure for our business.
Are you struggling with the ordinary English language meaning of the words that I'm using in my questions?
I'm focusing on corporate finance, Senator, and that's what we use.
I am asking you about return on equity. I'm not asking you about any other accepted measure of profitability. I'm asking you about this particular accepted measure of profitability, which is return on equity. Would you dispute that your ROE in the last financial year was about 26%?
Senator, with respect, we look at return on funds employed.
I don't care what you look at, Mr. Banducci. You're not answering the question. Please address yourself to the question. Would you dispute that your return on equity in the last financial year, when you made $1.7 billion in profit, was about 26%? Would you dispute that?
Senator, with respect, we look at return on funds employed, which is the key measure, and is in our incentives and is the key thing we hold ourselves to account
Mr.
for.
Mr. Banducci, please. This morning will go far more smoothly for you, for the committee, and be far more beneficial to the millions of Australian shoppers who can't afford to shop at your outlets if you simply answer the questions. I'm asking you to answer the questions. Would you dispute that your return on equity in the last financial year, when you made $1.7 billion in profit, was about 26%? I'm not interested in what figure you want to use. I'm interested in this figure that the committee is interested in.
Senator, with due respect, we focus on return on investment, which is the key measure. What return do you put from a dollar invested in the business?
Mr. Banducci, you can focus on whatever you want to in your Woolworths board meetings, in your senior executive team meetings. You can focus on whatever you want to. I put it to you, the reason you don't want to focus on return on equity is because you don't like the story that it's telling, which is that you are basically profiteering and making off with massive profits at the expense of farmers, at the expense of your workers, and at the expense of Australian shoppers who you are price gouging. Why won't you answer a simple question about what your ROE is?
Senator, with due respect, we focus on return on investment.
I understand what you focus on, Mr. Banducci. I do understand that. You've been very clear about that. You can focus on whatever you like. Isn't it the fact that you don't want to engage on return on equity because of the story that it tells?
Senator, this is the number we focus on because a dollar investment, you need to get the return out of it, and we look at the dollar of investment put into our business and the return. That is wired into our incentive structures. That is the right way for us to look at our business. What is the investment you put in and what is the return you get out? You're
just cherry-picking the data you want to talk about because it misleads Australians about the profitability of your company. That's the case, isn't it?
Senator, I think everyone hopefully understands return on investment. What return do you get from a dollar you invest in the business?
I think everyone understands return on equity, Mr. Banducci, which is a completely accepted financial performance metric that shows how profitable a company is. Do you accept that your return on equity in the last financial year, when your company made $1.7 billion in profit, was about 26%?
Senator, with due respect, we focus on return on investment. That is the key number that we should focus on, and that is the number that is in our long-term incentives. It's a common corporate finance measure. It's the right measure. What return do we get on a dollar put into our business?
Mr. Banducci, Your return on equity is actually easy to calculate based on publicly available figures, including in your annual reports. A first-year commerce student at university could calculate your return on equity. I'm interested to know why you won't confirm what it is. Isn't it the fact that by this measure, a completely accepted way of determining the profitability of a corporation like yours, one of, if not the first things a potential investor would look at, isn't it the fact that that figure, 26%, in a year where you made $1.7 billion in profits, shows that your company is making off like bandits and effectively has a licence to print money because you are actually providing goods to the Australian people that they can't do without. You operate in a captive market and people have to eat.
Senator, outside of return on investment, the other key measure which I talked about in my opening statement was our return on shareholder, our total shareholder return over the last 5 years. That too was 10%. If you were going to look at a measure an investor might focus on outside of return on investment, the return on our either through capital appreciation or dividend is the other key number. Our average dividend is at $1.33 for each share. If you turn that back into a return for the shareholder, for the 350,000 retail shareholders in Australia that hold our shares, it is just over 3%, Senator.
I'm not asking about that, Mr. Banducci. I have put it to you, I don't know, I've lost count, maybe a dozen times. Why won't you confirm for this committee what your return on equity was in the last financial year? I'm not interested in any of the other measures that you're talking about. I'm happy to talk about them later. I'm sure other committee members will have questions for you. Why won't you confirm what your ROE was? Why won't you do that for this committee? You are sworn to tell the truth here, Mr. Banducci, and I'm not interested in your spin. I'm not interested in the other things that you focus on. The committee will determine what the questions are. Please answer the question about ROE.
Senator, with due respect, we focus on our return on investment.
All right, I know what you focus on. Thank you, Mr. Banducci. I know what you focus on. You've been very clear about that. Let's talk about your ROE. Do you know which country has the most profitable banking sector in the world?
Senator, I don't.
No, you don't. Fair enough. It's Australia, Mr. Banducci. Do you know what the average ROE for banks in Australia is? It's less than half of yours. It's about 10%. We have rapacious banks in this country, either the most profitable banks in the world or close to the most profitable banks in the world, and you are making 2.5 times their return on investment. What have you got to say to that?
Senator, you just quoted return on investment, and I'm talking to return on investment.
On return on equity.
And our return on investment is 10% post-tax. The EBIT margin, which our net profit after tax, which we talked to, is 2.5 cents in a dollar spent at Woolworths Group.
I understand the figures. I understand the figures you want to talk about.
It's just over 3% right now for the incredibly important 350,000 retail investors that hold our shares. Indeed, at the moment, it is lower return on dividend than you might get for money in the bank.
Mr. Banducci, I understand the points you are making, and we will come to those points later. I assure you, I will absolutely ensure that you get an opportunity to talk about your margins, talk about your average margins. I guarantee you that. I'm not interested in those figures right now. I'm asking you about return on equity. And I want to put this to you. Australia's banks, on average, make a return on equity of about 10%. Australia has the most profitable banking sector in the world. They are rapacious corporations that are making off like bandits, yet your company has a return on equity more than 2.5 times the average of Australia's banks. How can you possibly suggest that that is in the best interests of Australian shoppers when millions of Australians are skipping meals, having to dumpster dive to survive, and are being price gouged by your company?
Senator, With due respect, we look at the return on investment, which is 10%. If you looked at the share market return, it's a 10% return over the last 5 years, of which just over 3% is the return on dividends for our hard-working retail investors, many mums and dads in Australia. So that are the numbers we look at, and that's the performance.
Why won't you
judge
answer
ourselves.
questions about return on equity, Mr Banducci? It's because you don't like the story they tell. It's because you don't like what they show. That's right, isn't it? I mean, you know, you say you've got no problem understanding my questions, and yet you have repeatedly refused to answer the question here today in front of a Senate inquiry. Why won't you answer the question?
Senator, we focus on
the question is not what you focus
on.
on.
Of investment in our business.
The question is not, Mr Banducci, it's not. The question is not what you focus on. That is not what I am asking you. You can focus on whatever you like for the rest of your life. You're here before a Senate committee today. We're not interested in PR spin. We're not interested in you kind of bullshitting your way through this committee. We are interested in you answering the questions. Would you please answer this very simple question about the fact that your return on equity is more than 2.5 times the return on equity made by Australian banks, which are the most profitable banking corporations in the world?
Senator, the key metrics that judge returns are return on investment, or we call it return on funds employed, or return in the stock market, whether it's a capital appreciation or a dividend. 10% return on invested capital after tax is our return over the last 10 years. Over the last 5 years, our total return on investment in Woolworths is also 10%, of which just over 3% was in the form of dividends to 350,000 hard-working Australian retail investors, plus many of Australia's largest superannuation funds.
How much did you make in the last financial year, Mr Banducci?
Senator, that's available in our annual report.
How much did you make in the last financial year?
So it's available on page 87
I'm
of
simply asking you the question, Mr Banducci. How much did you make in the last financial year?
Senator, as I said, it's available in our annual report.
I know it's available in your annual report, Mr Banducci, but I'm asking you, in front of a Senate committee, how much you made in the last financial year. I mean, what's your reluctance to disclose that? Round, I'm not asking to the nearest cent. That wouldn't be reasonable. Just in round terms, what did you make last financial year?
Senator, my base salary at Woolworths is $2.6 million. And then I get a short-term bonus and a long-term bonus depending on our performance relative to the metrics I've just talked about on top of that.
All right. And what did that add up to, your total remuneration in the last financial year?
As you would see in our annual report, I think it is $8.4 million in total, Senator.
Senator Still.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Mr Banducci, the passion that Senator McKim, the Chair, has for this inquiry is undisputable, and he is the Chair, and he is not going to stop the line of questioning. And I'm just, as a long-term Senator here, can I just advise that I understand you would have workshopped your way through with your executive team, but in the light of all the cameras in the room, Mr Banducci, you're not doing yourself a favour. You don't need to preach from a little fat old truck driver, and we know that information is available, but I think just to assist for the committee, if you could please be direct, then we can move to other questions and other questions around the table. We've got a number of occasions. You don't need to take my friendly advice, but it ain't going to help, and it's not looking good for you at the moment, right. Mr Banducci.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator Still. So 8.4 million was your total remuneration package in the last financial year, Mr Banducci?
Senator, yes, it was.
Thank you. So you made 8.4 million, but you don't know what your return on equity was? CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation booking, billion-dollar plus profits every year, and you don't know what your return on equity is. Is that right?
Senator, the equity value in Woolworths goes up and down over time. The key number that we focus on, as I've tried to be helpfully suggesting, is the return on investment. That is the key number that is measured in the business. Common finance number, you put $1 in, what return do you get on that dollar that you put into your business? Trying to achieve a return on funds employed above our cost of capital is what our goal is. as it is in any other corporate, I would suggest, in Australia.
What's the full adult base hourly rate on the shop floor for your workers?
Senator, it would be in the order of, pardon me if I go in round numbers.
That's okay.
If that's okay with you, at $29 an hour.
If I was to put it to you, that's about $25 an hour.
Senator, that's the number I quoted was the one per the questions we gave, which is just looking at the average, because the rates, even during the week, would have a little bit of penalty rate in them. So, pardon, that's the rate that our team earn on average as an adult rate inside Woolworths.
So, on your figures, that would mean that a shop floor worker at Woolworths working full-time, which I think you'd agree very few of your shop floor workers do actually work full-time, would have an annual salary of under $60,000. Would you agree with that?
Senator, in simple maths, that would be broadly what one of our team would earn. Would all depend on what, of course, as you would know, what shifts they work, etc.
Yeah, of course. So we've heard evidence from someone who works for Woolworths who says that he can't afford to shop at Woolworths because his wages are so low and your prices are so high. How do you respond to that?
Senator, it's something that we are very conscious of. One of the key things we are trying to balance at all times is value for customers, treating suppliers fairly, and giving our team a meaningful employment. And how we balance those, and then fair return in the midterm for our shareholders. That's what we are always working on. In terms of our team, the vast majority of our team, because I do see this as a critically important metric, about 75% of them would shop with us weekly, and we can.
Which means a quarter of them don't shop with you.
Not everyone shops weekly, Senator. I think over time you'd find that I would be very surprised if they weren't all shopping with us over a 2-week period.
Well, we've heard evidence that at least one isn't.
I'm very sorry to hear it, Senator. That is certainly not our goal. And one of the key benefits we provide our team is 5% off every time you shop at Woolworths.
A staff discount.
A team discount.
Yeah, team discount.
And then in addition to that, once a month you get 10% plus the extra 5% on our own brand, so 15%.
Thank you.
So it will change the shopping pattern there.
Do you have access to that discount, Mr. Banducci?
I do, Senator.
Do you use it?
Senator, no, I don't.
You don't. So your remuneration is somewhere about 150 times what one of your shop floor workers receives. Do you reckon you provide 150 times more value to Woolworths than one of your shop floor workers?
Senator, I'm acutely aware of the privilege I have of being the CEO of Woolworths, and I try and get up every day and do everything I can to fulfil my obligation and the privilege I have as the CEO of Woolies.
You've said that, in your view, Australia's supermarket sector is highly competitive. You said that in your opening statement. Do you accept that between you and Coles, you have just under 2/3 of the supermarket market share in Australia on a national basis?
Senator, I think this is a key issue, and if you permit me just to elaborate on a tiny bit, if that's acceptable to the committee. People often conflate grocery and supermarkets. We are a supermarket, but the grocery business is much bigger, as hopefully everyone is aware. And when you think about groceries, you find many other competitors compete for groceries. So supermarkets is it's a format in terms of competing for grocery share. So our share of groceries is materially lower than that. Our share of supermarkets in a very traditional sense is in line with what you were saying. I think this is a critical definition. If you walk a mall, if you walk with a shopper, you will see, firstly, Australians do cross-shop, and that's a good thing. They're very savvy. But you will see them cross-shop in a Woolworths supermarket with an independent fruit and veg supplier, but also perhaps with Chemist Warehouse, with the Reject Shop, maybe with Kmart, even Big W. Of course, they might drive out and also do that at Bunnings. So the grocery sector is much bigger than the supermarket sector, and I think that's a really, really important distinction to make. If you look at it that way, our share is in, even with not including Amazon for a moment, Senator, is in the low 20s. If you look at it as traditional supermarkets, yes, it is in the 30s. But I think it's a really important distinction that the committee needs to consider.
So how many Amazon supermarkets are currently in Australia?
Senator,
The answer's none, right?
Senator, how many people can Amazon serve within a 24-hour basis? 84% of Australians. With their new warehousing system, they can get to the households of those 84% of Australian households in 24 hours, Senator. And that's the key metric. The key metric is not how many stores you have, but how you can service your customers. And customers are looking for convenience. And Amazon Retail does provide that convenience. Over 4 million households have Amazon Prime, which gives them access to free delivery. It is hard to know exactly the gross market value of the retail they do because they often just report the seller commission. But it is somewhere between $5 and $7 billion from a cold start only a few years ago, Senator.
All right.
So it's very material.
So when you were interviewed by Four Corners, you disputed the view of the former ACCC chair, highly respected person and Professor Rod Sims, that Australia has one of the most concentrated supermarket sectors in the world. You said that is not true. That's about supermarket sector. Okay, that was the question that was put to you. You said it's not true that Australia has one of the most concentrated supermarket sectors in the world. I might add, Professor Alan Fells, another very well-respected competition expert, inaugural chair of the ACCC in this country, has also said and given evidence to this committee about the high level of concentration in the supermarket sector in Australia. If you're saying it's not true that Australia has one of the most concentrated supermarket sectors in the world, can you please name another country that has a more concentrated supermarket sector than Australia?
Thank you, Senator. Another very important issue. How do you define competition? I would argue passionately you need to look at the options available to a consumer in the community within
I'm
which...
asking about the supermarket sector, Mr. Banducci.
Thank you, Senator. I will get there.
Thank you.
In which they shop. And do they have the right range of options where they shop? Do they have one or two mainline supermarkets that give them broad range, hopefully at great everyday prices? Do they have at least one deep discounter, an Aldi, a Lidl, a Costco, that provides an anchor down in terms of what extreme value looks like? And do they have a series of vibrant independents that can provide often great local engagement and service? If you look at it that way, you would find this is as competitive as any place in the world. If you then look to the specifics of your question, Senator, we have a very, as you would know, 26, 27 million people, and you need to look at the competition in the context of like-for-like geographies or comparables. A place I often look at relative to Australia, not in the demographic makeup, but just to give you a sense, America is not America. You need to look at each different state. If you look at states like Texas or Florida, which are slightly bigger than us, and I think we would agree have some of the broader geographic characteristics of Australia, you will see higher levels of concentration in both of those states. In Texas, there's a wonderful retailer called H-E-B, founded very similar time to Woolies, that would have a much higher share than we do, and is competing very robustly there with Walmart and Aldi. And if you went into Florida, you would find Publix, which does likewise. So virtually every state in America, if we chose to talk about it, I think you will find actually more concentration than we do in Australia. I know we often talk about the UK as well, but I think, again, very important distinctions between looking at the south of the UK and the north. If you go up to the north in the UK, you will find a very different composition between the Asdas and the Morrisons and the Tesco's. If you go down to the south, then you will see the Sainsbury's and the Tesco's and so on. So you do need to look at it much more thoughtfully than just countries. These countries are not comparable, Senator. The same would be true in Holland if you look at Albert Heijn and the composition of what they do. So I look at competition, which I think is the right way to look at it in a consumer sense. In terms of the range of options available to me in my community, Australians have, in general, the right range of options available to them in most of the communities in Australia. Not in everyone, of course.
So, Ms Banducci, I've allowed you sort of free rein there to make your points, and you've, again explained to the committee what you look at. The committee will decide what it looks at, and just as with my questions on return on equity, which you refused to answer, you are now, again, focusing on what you want to look at, not what the committee wants to look at. So I'd just ask you again. You said on Four Corners that it's not true that Australia has one of the most concentrated supermarket sectors in the world. Do you stand by that position?
Senator, I do. What I was trying to elaborate on in that interview was, if you look at the level of competition in Australia, even between 2008 and 2024, the dramatic growth in Aldi is material. And it's, if you look at store growth, and I'm sure we'll come back to topics around growth of stores in the country, the major store growth has been coming from Aldi. But once you take Aldi, which is one of the biggest retailers in the world, Aldi Sud, and then you look at Costco, and the growth of Costco, which is constant. Every year they open 1 or 2 warehouses, and they've got 4 to 5 times the revenue in each warehouse as even a high-performing supermarket. Once you add those two, and I would argue, Senator, that Costco is arguably the most successful physical retailer in the space we operate right now globally. And then you put on top of that the explosive growth we're seeing inside Amazon. This is a very competitive market. Never mind
so
the
Professor Fells is wrong, Professor Sims is wrong, a range of extremely well-credentialed economists have also given evidence to this committee that we have a highly concentrated supermarket sector. They're all wrong and you're right. Is that what you're saying, Mr Banducci?
Senator, I'm just looking at the facts, and the world changes. It changes every day in terms of new stores, new competitors. I think we were all hopefully, well, not hopefully, I think we were all surprised by the size of Chemist Warehouse when they revealed their size and their growth. It is a very competitive market, and it is good for Australian consumers.
Mr Banducci, Woolworths' market share went up between 2023 and 2024, didn't it? It went up from 36.3% of the supermarket sector in 2023 to 37.2% in 2024. I mean, your market share is growing, isn't it?
Senator,
isn't it? Is your market share growing, Mr.
If you look at, Senator, if you look at the overall grocery sector, we are holding share. And in fact, if you look over the last 10 years, you see us holding share of grocery.
I mean, that's what you want to do as a CEO, isn't it?
Senator,
like you're trying to grow your business, right? So wouldn't you be happy to confirm that your market share is actually increasing?
Senator, I'm just saying as share of grocery, which is, I think, is the key construct I would suggest we should talk to. Our share is flat over the last 10 years. Did it grow between 22 and 23? Yes, there was a slight shift up in our overall share between those 2 years, Senator.
All right. Thanks. I'm going to have to share the call shortly, but I will come back for another bracket of questions, and I just urge you to have a think about responding on the return on equity, please, Mr Banducci. As I said to you earlier, we're not interested in what you want to talk about, we're interested in what we want to understand, and return on equity is an accepted measure of profitability for companies. So I just ask you to please consider your response, because I just flagged with you I will come back to that. The last thing I wanted to ask you in this tranche of questions is whether Woolworths engages in land banking.
Senator, thank you. Again, if you will permit me to just talk to what I would define as land banking. I'm sure we'll have a broader conversation on this topic in the context of the next couple of hours. Land banking is where we buy a piece of greenfield land and we don't develop it.
That's one
leave it out there. That would be the traditional definition of land banking, Senator. We do not do that. We do buy land in growth corridors, both for potential new developments that come up as the population of Australia grows, but also very importantly for our supply chain, which Senator Still would know well, the importance of getting the right places to have DCs, distribution centres for the future. So we would be looking for opportunities in growth corridors for industrial and retail land, and with an eye to developing those sites, Senator. The lead time on those developments can take between 5, 7, perhaps 10 years. So there is a long lead time in doing that. We do not hold any site without a plan to develop it. That would not, give us the right return on investment, Senator, no matter which way we debate it.
Well, in fact, blocking a competitor would assist you in increasing or maintaining your profit levels and your return to shareholders, would it not, Mr Banducci?
Senator, all the land that we acquire is with an eye to developing it as either as a distribution centre or any form of other industrial support infrastructure we need to put in, or into growth corridors where we hope that we'll see a new Australian community that we will have the privilege to serve.
Can you provide to the committee on notice, please, every site that Woolworths currently holds that does not have a Woolworths facility on it?
Senator, I'm happy to take that on notice and see what we can provide.
Well, I mean, that data would be available. I mean, you'd know what land you own, right?
Senator, so I'm happy to take it on notice.
But you will you provide it to the committee on notice? Will you give a commitment that you will provide to the committee on notice a list of all the sites that are owned by Woolworths that do not currently have a Woolworths facility on them?
Senator, I will take the question on notice and see what we can provide, definitely.
I mean, the reason I'm just following this up, Mr Banducci, is I thank you for taking the question on notice, but what I'm after is an indication that you will actually provide that information to the committee on notice. Can you confirm that you will provide that information to the committee on notice? Because we've heard allegations of land backing by the supermarket duopoly, and the committee takes that very seriously.
Senator, I will take the question on notice.
So you won't give a commitment today that you will provide that information to the committee. You'll simply say you'll provide a response, which may or may not contain that information, Mr Banducci.
Senator, we have the best of intent in all of the questions we get and what we will provide. I need to go back and work with the team on, there might be some sensitive confidentiality agreements we've committed to. I'm not aware of them. I'm saying we will go back and see what we can provide. Rest assured of my commitment to be as transparent as we can.
Thank you. And as part of that response to the question on notice, Mr Banducci, could you please also take on notice how long you have owned each undeveloped site for?
Happy to take that on notice.
All right, thanks. Senator Stewart.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Mr Banducci, there's a lot of going around in my head, but I've got to get a bit of preamble out of the way. And as you know, you and I have been on different sides of the argument in terms of the supply chains and transport costs and waiting times at DCs. And we're working our way through that. That's no worries. But I also, I'm a little bit different to some of my colleagues on the committee here, where I live in Perth down Fremantle Way, we have plenty, in my opinion, we have plenty of competition. We've got Aldi, which I spend more time protesting at their stores than anything else. We have Woolworths, we have Coles, we have Metcash, there's a couple of good grocers. So from where I live, certainly not rural, I see plenty of competition. But I also say when I walk out of a Coles store or a Woolly store or a Metcash, there's not a lot left in your bag for $100. And we've seen the supply chains under intense pressure through the pandemic. So let me just get this out of the way. Can I pass on to your employees what a magnificent job they did through the pandemic? I know, because our truckies were on the other end of the dock, couldn't keep up with it, but they did a damn good job while they were getting 9-inch pencils shoved up their nose every time they crossed the border. And I worked closely with Woolworths to make sure our truckies were treated as humans in your DCs to get access to toilets and that sort of stuff. But I've got to come back to this, and it's my 19 years on the RAP committee for sins of my previous life. But we have heard a lot of evidence, and we get it all the time, from growers, from farmers and suppliers to you. They are absolutely traumatised that they don't want to be seen or be heard giving evidence to a committee if they're supplying you. We hear a lot that bag the living daylights out the supermarkets, but they don't supply them anymore. And that makes it very difficult for us on this side of the table to say, hey, Mr Woolworths or Mr Coles or whatever, this is proof that you're screwing living dollars. So a lot of it's conversations across the table from people that don't supply anymore. So I want to get to the question here is, I did a little run myself back in Freo the other week, and I went to the Met Cashers, and their groceries are far more dearer than yours and Coles. And I made a speech in the Senate the other day that I'm saying that I believe all our truckies should be paid while they're waiting at DCs, and we'll work through that argument, which would put the cost on top of the supply chain through your stores. I also say very clearly that, and I've been asking all the growers, do you get return on investment? Every single one of them says to us, no, we don't, but we don't supply Coles and Woolies anymore. But I'm saying this, that they need to be reimbursed and they need to get cost recovery. So I'm sort of conflicted here because I'm saying you don't get a lot in your bag for $100, but I'm also saying that, hang on, they should have the ability of the growers to come back and have a rate review every time the costs go up. Am I on the wrong path here?
No, I think, Senator, this is the dilemma we're all engaging on in these inquiries. Firstly, if you don't mind me just saying, it's still another 10 days before we have Western Australia back into the level of supply we would.
Because of the
just
weather,
given the material disruption we've had just going across the Nullarbor, you would be well aware. So for all of our Western Australian shoppers, there are still material issues in supply there. Working very hard, and I know our competitors are, to get them back into supply. But 165 days a year, do we have a material form of disruption every second day right now? And it does put compromises, which I'm sure we'll come back to, particularly into truck drivers and times they drive and so on, Senator. No doubt we'll come back to that. Secondly, and I think this is another important point, if you don't mind me making it broadly, and I'm sure we can come back to it. What Woolworths does do is we follow national pricing on long-life groceries. So I'll talk about fresh in a moment. But on long-life groceries, we try and provide the same price everywhere in Australia. So the shelf price you see should be the same whether it's in Fremantle or it's in Sydney or it's in Launceston, as the case may be. We try and do that because we think that's key for us as a national organisation to provide those level of prices. What that means is even if there's just one Aldi in wherever, when we price match that Aldi, which we can come back and talk about, that will be reflected everywhere across our network. So you don't need an Aldi near you to get great prices. That's the way we operate and the way we think we should operate. What it does mean is that in different communities, Senator, Fremantle for one, you could find a very large price difference between where a Woolworths is at price-wise and a local independent IGA. And the price gap could be in the order of 7%. So that is just a key thing for us to come back to, and there's good and bad in that, which we can come back and talk about, Senator. We do the same on fruit and veg, but we do it at a state level because just the nature of Australia is so complex, it wouldn't be sensible to do it at a national level. So it's done at a state level where, again, we will national price fruit and veg for the state concerned.
Right.
If you then, sorry.
So no, keep going.
So it's an important point that we'll come back to later, as I'm no doubt. And again, we think that that's critically important for what we're doing. If you look at the moment, the challenge we have in Australia, then, Senator, is most of the price inflation we've experienced actually is in long-life groceries. It's packaged products. The aisles you see, that's where we've had the real inflation, in particular in non-food-based products, dishwashing, tablets, or whatever the case may be. In fruit and veg in particular, and I know we'll come back to the line of question on this, we've had deflation in the last 12 months in Australia. So it's quite a different story depending which part of the store we're talking to. There's the challenge for growers or producers, in particular in fruit and veg at the moment, and then there's material challenges for consumers actually in the long life parts of the store, and how we balance that out is really what our role is in this process, to get the right balance of value for customers, treating our suppliers fairly, but also giving the right level of employment for our team.
So, Mr. Banducci, it came through loud and clear in the hearing so far that there's a belief that there's a particularly ugly squeeze on producers of fruit and veg that's got a short lifespan on the shelves, and we've heard all sorts of stories, and I'm sure your people heard all those stories too. So can you just enlighten us, no names, no pack drill, but how do the growers come to you and negotiate, come to Woolworths and negotiate rate variations, and in what timetable? Do they get a review every 12 months? Well, what actually happens with Woolies?
Thank you, Senator. So it depends by each value chain in fresh. So it's very different when we're talking to beef, to lamb, to pork, to dairy, or to, indeed, fruit and veg. I assume your question is primarily around fruit and veg.
Fruit and veg. Yep.
Which is the most challenged, I think, in Australia. It does run to a traditional market price setting mechanic. So, again, given the line of questions, if you'll permit me just to sort of set it up.
And I want to hear.
Okay.
Very keen.
So there are about 12,500 fruit and veg businesses in Australia. We work with about 350 of those, and we buy from them a wholesale-ready, a retail-ready product. We buy it wholesale, which means the product needs to have been picked, graded, packed in the right specification, and then delivered ideally to the closest distribution centre for the supplier. So we deal with 350 out of the 12,000 plus, Senator. For those 350, 80% of them have been with us for more than 10 years, so they're very deep, long relationships. The way we would work with them, and again, it will depend on whether it's a seed crop or a tree crop, but just go broad.
A seed?
Yeah, something we plant in the ground.
A seed.
And,
sorry.
Or, to me, if you don't mind me saying, I sort of go from potatoes to apples, and I'm sure we'll come back to all of those, but, one that you've got high certainty of what you do, and one that there's very dynamic short-term changes in. Actually, potatoes to strawberries actually would be more accurate in terms of the volatility of what happens. What we would try and do, and again, I'm painting a broad picture, Senator, so please come back with specifics.
Go ahead.
We would go to our suppliers and give them a forecast of what we reasonably expect we would want that season based on what our consumers are looking for. So they would get a long-term demand forecast from us, which would give them the ability to plan. That's done, and again, it depends slightly by the nature of the crop. And then it goes to this traditional market system, which is in a 2-week period, you will confirm with the grower what their volumes are and what prices they are open to supply you, and then you will agree a price and a volume, and that will then be delivered, in our case.
So you agree, so your people agreed the price before the product is picked?
Before the product is delivered, Senator, I can't talk to whether apples could be kept in a chilled freezer, but before the product is delivered, we have agreed the price. We would agree that 2 weeks out based on a volume. And then the product is delivered into our distribution centre. We do inspect the quality of the product as it comes into the distribution centre. In the order of, I think, around 2% is rejected based on the quality of the product, which we can talk about. But once it's in our system, we take all liability for the product and any other costs with moving the product to the store, onto the shelf, back into the chilled side of the store, to our cost, as are any markdowns, or in rare circumstances with fruit and veg, the dumping of the product. So that's broadly the way it works.
Okay, because like with our transport companies, they come to you and they sit down, and I can tell you, the transport companies you use, in my best knowledge, are all reputable operators throughout the country that I've seen. So no dramas there. The people are paid properly. But they negotiate their contracts with you, I don't know the answer, yearly or 4-year or whatever it might be, and there's probably clauses for fuel rises and that sort of stuff. Am I right?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. But do the growers have that ability to have their variables where they're exposed to rapid fertiliser costs or shortness of fertiliser or rising fuel costs? Do they have that same ability?
In fruit and veg across Australia, it runs to this traditional market system. It's supply and demand, and so it runs in a very different way in fruit and veg in Australia, Senator.
How?
Well, as I say, it is what volume is available, and therefore you agree a price for that volume.
Before you pick it up? I don't mean to interrupt you.
No.
Do they have the ability but to sit with you prior to the planting with your people and say, right, at the present, this is our cost, put it in lettuces or whatever it might be? Or is it just a case of we've picked it all, we've cut them all, they're sitting in the coal store waiting, and then your people come in and go, well, this is what we're going to pay now. Is that... This is what I'm hearing, and if I've got it wrong, I just...
Yeah, no. It is a traditional market system, so we would give us a demand forecast within 2-week period, though. We would then confer with the grower whether actually, or the wholesaler in our case, whether they had the volume available, just given the variability of the growing season, and if they had the volume available, what price we could buy it at. We would then agree that price with the aggregator or wholesaler, and the price would be for delivery into generally the closest distribution centre to that particular wholesaler, so that they could optimise the transport cost.
All right. Now, in all fairness, to shift the thing around, because I'll probably have to segue for Senator Cadell and others, but I do want to have a talk with your people about the DCs. I want to have, and this is not new to Woolworths, but I haven't had the ability to sit down and have that real conversation now, that our interstate truckies particularly, who come in overnight, who are sitting in your DCs waiting to get unloaded, there's no picking order, they just sit there and they move the truck and then they move, and Woolies freight is sitting on the back of them 3-4 hours. A lot of our truck drivers don't tell, and I'm not dobbing them in because they've told me in a committee, they don't mark it on their fatigue management, because that will stuff them up getting back to Melbourne or Sydney or whence they came from the night before. That's a pretty big accusation, but that's on the record what they've told me. Okay, so we need to fix that. But I also want to sit with your people. We don't want to get paid while we're sitting around waiting. We'd rather just get in, get unloaded and get the hell out of there, because we've got another load to pick up that we miss out because we get caught in the DCs, not just yours. You're right. Can I have that conversation with your people, particularly not in this area, but in my office one day?
Senator, can I just acknowledge the material contribution you are making to a safer supply chain? I'm very aware of the comments. Driver fatigue, actually getting drivers right now is one of the big challenges, as you are well aware in Australia. Drivers do not want to wait outside distribution centres. They want to get home to their families, and they don't want to be putting their own safety at risk through driving when they shouldn't. So it's a big area of focus. As you know, inside COVID, we did get a lot of disruption and a lot of drivers having to wait outside the distribution centres and a lot of compromises. Our team have committed to me, they're working very hard on this issue, and ideally, as you might be aware, we should have an electronic logbook for a truck driver. It would be ideal, Senator, where we use telematics into an electronic logbook, and the ability then to use that to validate what's happening. What we do ask truck drivers to do as they come into a distribution centre is to sign a document that says they have enough time left on their shift to do a safe unload and get out. But we do spot checks, but there's always more we can do there, Senator.
Sure. And my commentary is around productivity. That's where I want to go. Okay?
I think it's the right focus. Senator.
All right. Thank you. I know that we're top of time. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Steele. Senator Kovacic, who's joining us online.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr Banducci, for appearing today. My first question actually talks to one of your comments that you made around cross-shopping and customers cross-shopping. We've heard allegations where Coles and Woolworths will force suppliers to only fund specials on alternate weeks. Can you confirm if you do this and if it is an explicit contract term?
Thank you, Senator. It's not something we do. What we do, if you don't mind me just explaining again, and we can set it up for follow-up questions, is we will agree...
I'm happy with a brief explanation.
Okay. What we will agree with a long-life supplier, which is what we're talking to here, would be a promotional plan, and we sort of agree that 6 months out, because there's production to be planned and a whole lot of supply chain logistics that we've just been talking to be executed. So it would be a plan that's agreed at least 6 months out, and then these promotions are done what is called slotted into the system.
Are there impacts to a supplier if they provide specials on the same week? So is there some kind of a detriment to them, or are they impacted if the specials aren't on alternate weeks, is my specific question.
There would be not by Woolworths, Senator. I'm sure the suppliers, though, would just logically want to have different promotions at different times in different customers that they deal with.
So it's entirely up to them how they do that?
Senator, yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Could you also tell me what role global consumer good companies play in the prices that Australian consumers pay at the checkout?
So,
your Mars, your Unilever, your Cokes, all of that kind of stuff.
Kellogg's, Benkiza,
Yep.
Heinz. Senator, in our submission, what we talk to is there is a bit of a dichotomy right now in what we're dealing with. We've got actually more inflation in the long life products, where we tend to have more of the global consumer goods companies engaging with us than in the fresh side of the business. And so we need to keep them relatively separate. In engaging with our long life suppliers, that is where we have seen real inflation. And in many cases very legitimate, with factory disruptions around the world, and obviously with the material rise in sea freight, which has come down, although we're having another balance with what's happening in the Red Sea. So we would get relatively material. We have in the last 2 years cost increase requests from our partners there. And while we engage constructively with them, they have not been immaterial, the increases that we've accepted. And then a portion of those, or in some cases all of them, are passed on to consumers. In doing that, we make the ultimate decision on what price to put on the product for the consumer, Senator. However, we always do take into account the recommended retail price that is suggested by the consumer goods company involved. So they would not dictate the price on shelf, but we do obviously look at the RRP, and our goal is to make sure our price is within the recommended retail price if we want to stay competitive.
Okay. So would you consider them to be price setters or price takers, or would you say that you are negotiating those prices with the global multinationals?
So, Senator, they are wholesale price setters, but what happens with the wholesale price invariably is reflected in the retail price, but we will make the retail price decision. But just given the nature of our relatively thin margins, a material increase of 6, 8, 10% in a wholesale price will result in an increase in the retail price.
And have you been under significant pressure from them to increase prices on their long life goods?
Senator, in our submission, you will see that we have, and it's really been going on about 2.5 years. It's really happened post the end of COVID as a virus, I guess, and there were these material increases in their supply chains, and therefore we lent in. But we've had 3 or 4 times as many cost increase requests as we've had historically. We've lent in and engaged with them within the context of the grocery code and the rules in the grocery code. And on average, if our consumer goods partners have asked for 12%, we've agreed on average somewhere around 2/3 to 70% of that in terms of the final agreement. And then, of course, that then flows through into retail prices.
Thank you. What do you say about the many allegations we've heard around, intimidation, from, by smaller suppliers, effectively small businesses? So, Woolworths is a large business, a lot of your growers and the farmers might be smaller businesses. What do you say to those allegations that we've heard a lot of over the past few weeks? So they're not isolated. They're worrying. They're significant, and that's something that I would expect that perhaps has been discussed at boardroom level at Woolworths, and we'd be interested to know what you think of that.
Thank you, Senator. I think you make a really important distinction between small suppliers and large ones. I should add, by the way, even in fruit and veg, there are 12 suppliers that are half of the value of all fruit and veg sold in retail in this country. So they're big suppliers in fruit and veg, just like there are in nappies or other parts of our shop. But there is a big difference between big and small, and I would just like to call out the work that has been done by the independent reviewer of the grocery code, Chris Leptos, to highlight some of the challenges with small suppliers. We do talk about it a lot. Invariably, from our perspective, Senator, we're a big company. I wish there wasn't bureaucracy, but there is often, at least in the eyes of the small suppliers, and we can do a much better job of them filling in forms, making sure the processes work, make sure they understand our processes, make sure they get effective communication. We've already addressed the trading terms. Our small suppliers are paid in 14 days or less, but there's still a lot of work to be done in engaging constructively with them. Post the independent reviewer report from last year, we've created a small supplier team just to engage and really help the small supplier deal with Woolies, and we've put quite a material investment into that. I'm very hopeful as you look at our performance overall. If Mr Leptos does his review next year, you'll see a material lift in Woolworths' performance in terms of the way it engages with small suppliers. But it is there is sophisticated players and less sophisticated players, and can we do more for the less sophisticated players? Absolutely. Are we doing it? Yes, but I'm sure there's still more we could do.
Thank you. And speaking, continuing to speak about suppliers, when you enter a forward contract for a perishable product over, say, 2 or 3 seasons, how much of that product do you guarantee to take? And if it isn't 100%, if it's not all of it, on what basis do you then vary that contracted volume?
So it varies for milk versus for fruit and veg. I assume, Senator, you're talking to fruit and vegetables.
Yes.
If we're talking to fruit and vegetables...
perishable, yes, correct.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. If we're talking to fruit and vegetables, Senator, as I was just saying to Senator Stirl, it is a market-based setting that is used to agree the ultimate price. We will give a demand forecast.
It's not about the price, it's how much of the product you guarantee to take.
When we do our demand forecast and give it to individual suppliers, Senator, I have gone back and had a look at it in preparation for being here. It's pretty good where the season is predictable. So what we give and what we take tends to reconcile, but it does depend by product, just given the growing variability. Right now there's a challenge with blueberries and just the nature of the season, and so there can be material movements in what's available as much as anything else. So where it is predictable, we seem to reconcile pretty well. But it does depend by product.
To provide on notice what that pretty well is and give us a scale of percentages in relation to that?
Senator, I'm happy to take it on notice and see what we can provide. It does need to be done in the way I've looked at it is by the nature of the crop. Potatoes or carrots or, as I say, when you get to these pip fruit, you might be accurate over the season, but you could be terribly inaccurate in any one week, if you know what I mean, depending on what's happened in that.
I think a season is reasonable to have an understanding over a season. Absolutely, yeah. So when you go to discount payments to growers for product that's close to the end of the shelf life, how do you calculate that? And obviously you have sophisticated sales volume data as well. So does that assist you in determining that, or is it just based on, effectively what is left on the shelf?
Senator, sorry, would you mind repeating the question? I just want to make sure I fully understand. My apologies.
Yeah. How do you discount payments to growers for products that are on your shelves that are close to the end of their shelf life? And is that connected in any way to any of the data that you have? So you know how much broccoli you're going to sell. So you've bought X amount of broccoli and now the broccoli on the shelf is wilting. How do you determine how much you're going to discount that and how that is passed on to the grower?
Thank you, Senator. Once we have received the product into our distribution centre, we take all risk from there on in. So we don't go back to the supplier. It's up to us from there. Now, what does happen at the distribution centre, about 2% of product is rejected. One of the key things we do at the distribution centre is make sure the product is in the right quality for our customers. If there's one thing consumers hate in Australia, it's throwing things away at home, in particular fruit and vegetables. So trying to have enough shelf life at home is key. So once we've accepted it into the distribution centre, and we do assess the product there based on the temperature that it comes in at, as well as the visual aspects, and therefore how long we think it will last, everything from there, Senator, is to our account. It's not to the supplier's account, because it's up to us to manage it from there into the store, onto the shelf, back into the chilled area of the store, and so on.
So there is no markdown cost passed on to the grower? Okay, thank you. My next question is in relation to bananas. I'm quite curious. We don't import bananas, to my knowledge. And Coles and Woolies tend to have roughly the same price across their bananas. And yet, for some reason, we have some of the most expensive bananas in the world, even though we grow them here. Do we have any understanding of why that is? And is that connected to them being a base product that people can tend to come into the supermarket for?
Thank you, Senator. Firstly, just if you don't permit me, just one fact that I find interesting. The number one product sold in virtually every supermarket in the developed world is bananas. It is the one universal product that everyone buys. And being price competitive on bananas, therefore, is critical, because customers will judge you not only on the quality of the banana when they come in, but the price. So being price competitive on bananas is an absolute given, and something we and our competitors all focus on. For that reason, it's in more customers' baskets than any other product. I would need to take on notice the relative prices of bananas in Australia versus overseas, Senator. As I say, we are very focused on price, but I would just need to go back and do the comparisons. I'm pretty good at many of those, but not on that question, if that's okay.
Because they're grown so far away from the big city centres, that have a bit to do with it more?
Yes, Senator Still. I mean, they are growing up in places like far north Queensland in particular, and they come down and then we put them into ripening rooms closer to home, and then we get them to the minimum condition before they come to the shelf. So there are a couple of steps in the process given where they're grown. But I just don't know the relative prices, and I'm happy to take that on notice.
We just don't want our truckers getting a discount.
Thank you. I have another question actually about cash in your supermarkets. Could you tell me whether you have whether your supermarkets are having cash flow issues due to the problems with Armaguard? And I know it's obviously a question for Coles, but Coles had to go cashless at some stores over Easter as a result. So I'm curious to know whether Woolworths has been impacted by these same problems.
Thank you, Senator. There's a lot of engagement, as you would be aware, between the banks and the major retailers on cash and cash management with Armaguard. We are not facing those issues. The issue we need to work very hard on is not whether we've got enough cash, but the balance of cash in our checkouts. So we've got the right mix of cash available in our checkouts for our customers. So it's more of a balancing issue for us than the amount of cash, which we'll find at this stage. And we're very sensitive to the issue because often our regional stores can be more cash reliant than perhaps some of our city stores. So it's an ongoing area of focus for us.
Yeah, and it's also a significant issue for older Australians who prefer to use cash and don't want to be forced into a situation where they have to use a card for their purchases. So, thank you. Just a really basic question. Why are groceries so expensive? Why are they so expensive for Australians to go and buy? Why is something that was $3 or $4, I'll use an example, mainland butter I think used to be about $5 a tub, it's now about $7 a tub. Why are groceries so expensive?
Senator, if you look at the last 10 years, we had 7 years of relatively muted, if not deflation in groceries. That came to an end after COVID, and there were very legitimate reasons at the start of that. All these factory disruptions, supply chain disruptions, the freight costs went to $14,000 a container from $2,000 to $3,000 a container. So there was this material disruption that took place globally that really did lead to, for the first time in a decade, the increase we're talking about. And the increase has been about, it's been very short in period, which is why it's so noticeable. It's been about 25 months. And so people shop a grocery store every 2 weeks. You'll go in and, to your point, you notice those differences because you shop so frequently. So it's been very compressed. Overall, it's been about 12% in the last 2 years, about 6% compound, but it's the compression of it as well as the shopping frequency that makes it so noticeable. What I'm hopeful for, and certainly we as a team are working on, is we are seeing that come off. In fact, I could tell you last week at Woolworths there was no inflation on shelf last week in Woolworths. 1 week doesn't make a month, never mind a quarter or a year. But it is coming down as these factories become more efficient and as we engage, hopefully respectfully but also robustly with our global consumer goods companies on getting the right prices for our customers on shelf.
Okay, do you support the code being mandatory? And in addition to that, is there anything that you think should be included in the code that isn't in the code currently?
Thank you, Senator. I'm a grocer, not a lawyer, so I'll give you my grocer answer if you don't mind, and you can...
I think that you are a influential and experienced grocer. Yeah.
We've plenty of lawyers working for you, Mr. Banducci, I'm sure.
Thank you, Senator. Yes. But if I talk to the question, we were supportive with it being mandatory. We at Woolworths, and this you can take this for what it is, would like to set ourselves a higher bar than the code. So the higher the code is, the more it forces us to lift above that. We do want to be the partner of choice for our suppliers. So we are very supportive of being mandatory. We do think it is a grocery code, therefore should apply to all people who sell meaningful amounts of groceries in the country. And that includes all of the other parties we've talked about earlier, whether it's Bunnings in household care or pet care, whether it's Amazon as it gets through the boundary because it is in personal care as well as household care, Discount Chemist Warehouse or Chemist Warehouse in particular in personal care as well. And in saying that, it's not us deflecting because it would include therefore Big W and us to force our Big W team to also live to the same standard. So it is a grocery code and it should apply to all grocers. We are very keen to make sure that the informal aspects of the current code are kept because a problem resolved very easily and quickly is the best problem resolved. And so, yes, there need to be consequences of poor behaviour and we don't resile from those, but you do want the informal aspect so that it's the best way to address things because it solves the problem immediately without the unintended consequences. So keeping the informal part as well as the formal part is key, but we are supportive and we will engage very constructively on it. We do measure our team on knowledge and adherence to the code, but actually for our team we would like to actually them to be much better than that, and therefore we measure them on many other things that we can come back and talk about as well.
All right, Senator Kovacic, I will come back to you if you have a further tranche of questions. I've just got
I do have it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Kovacic. I will ensure that you get a further opportunity to ask Mr. Banducci some questions. Mr. Banducci, look, just before the break, I want to try again on return on equity. I mean, we had a long discussion about this earlier. Can I just ask firstly, do you accept that return on equity is one of several standard and accepted measures of profitability for a company?
Senator, can only comment on what we focus on, which is return on investment.
In fact, you can just answer the question, Mr. Banducci.
Senator,
I'm not interested, honestly, I'm not interested in what you focus on. I'm interested in what the committee wants to focus on. Do you accept, I'm not even asking you what your ROE is here yet, I'm simply asking you, do you accept that return on equity? I mean, you're a major corporate player in this country. You've peeled about $65 million out of Woolworths since you started as CEO. I mean, you've been extremely well remunerated, to put it mildly. Do you accept that return on equity is one of the accepted measures and an accepted benchmark for assessing a company's profitability.
Senator, our two key measures are return on investment and return on shareholder return.
You've repeatedly
Those
said
are the
that.
two key measures.
Are they your two key measures, Mr Banducci? Isn't it the case that you don't want to talk about return on equity because you don't like the story that it tells, and that story is that your corporation is making off like bandits in terms of the profits you make, which flow then in part directly into your pockets, because the bigger the profits Woolworths make, the larger your remuneration. And you don't want to talk about that because your return on equity is more than 2.5 times the average ROE made by Australia's banks, which are the most profitable banks in the world. That's the story your ROE tells, and you don't want to talk about that story, which is why you won't answer the questions. That's right, isn't it?
Senator, both of the metrics I'm talking to are in my long-term incentive plan, and total shareholder return for an investor is the number that our shareholders do hold us to. As I've said, it's been 10% over the last 5 years, of which 3% has been in the form of a dividend, which at the moment goes to 350,000 hard-working Australian retail investors, and is below, actually, the cost they could have of that money in the bank.
Mr Banducci, you've repeatedly refused to answer my question on return on equity. I feel compelled to advise you that it is open to the Senate to hold a witness in contempt when they refuse to answer a legitimate question. I also feel compelled to advise you that opens up a range of sanctions, personal sanctions, that can be applied against you if that's what the Senate decides to do. Having said that, I ask you again, is your return on equity in the last financial year about 26%?
Senator, I've answered the question many times.
You have not answered the question, Mr Banducci. Honestly, I'm not interested in your spin or your bullshit. This is a Senate inquiry. Answer the question. Was your return on equity 26% in the last financial year, which is more than 2.5 times the average ROE enjoyed by Australian banks, which are the most profitable banks in the world? Is that true or not?
Senator, I sit here before you very respectfully saying we would measure ourselves return on investment
not answering the
and
questions.
total shareholder returns.
Well,
both of them around 10%.
You want to cherry pick your measure of profitability. Isn't it the case that you're also cherry picking your data on competition in Australia? You've continually mentioned Amazon, Costco and Aldi in defence of your position, your assertion that we have a highly competitive supermarket sector in Australia. I live in Tasmania, Mr Banducci. There are no Aldis. In Tasmania, there are no Costcos. In Tasmania, there are no Amazon centres in Tasmania. None of those things exist in Tasmania. When you were on Four Corners, you said that Aldi exists in every community. That is just simply untrue. Aldi have told this committee they've got no plans to expand in Tasmania. So what have you got to say to the people of Tasmania when you say that Australia has a very competitive supermarket sector? How would you say to someone in Tasmania who says that is just simply untrue in Tasmania?
Senator, I talked to the question of how we price before. We price nationally on all of our long-life products. They are priced to be competitive with Aldi, and our prices in Tasmania on long-life products are the same as they are everywhere else in Australia, in particular if you just look at Victoria. So we do make sure that the national pricing on our long-life products applies to all of the communities we're privileged to serve.
Would you say Tasmania has a highly competitive supermarket sector, Mr Banducci?
Senator, I would say that we make sure that there's national pricing, and any competition against an Aldi in Victoria in Melbourne is replicated in Home Tas Launceston, Burnie, whatever you may talk to.
Could you just please answer the questions that I'm asking? Mr. Banducci, you've said you've got no problem understanding the ordinary English language meaning of the words that I'm using in the questions. You're obviously an intelligent person. You're extremely well remunerated for the work that you do. Part of that work is appearing before this Senate committee today and answering the questions that we are asking you. Why can't you answer simple questions that I'm putting to you on behalf of the Australian people?
Senator, for our stores in Tasmania, they are line priced with the stores everywhere else, which are competitive with Aldi. The benefits of Aldi are felt in Tasmania on all the products we compete against them on. And I was talking not to competition in supermarkets, Senator, but competition in groceries.
Well, in fact, you disputed Professor Sims's assertion. When you were interviewed on Four Corners, you disputed Professor Sims's assertion that Australia had a highly concentrated supermarket sector. And you've stood by that today in the evidence that you've given to this committee. So you please don't talk about other definitions. Pretty sick of hearing that from you. With respect, Mr. Banducci, I would like you to answer the questions. And the very specific question I'm asking you is, would you say that Tasmania has a highly competitive supermarket sector? Yes or no would do.
Senator, there are 78 independent stores in Tasmania, which are twice the number of Woolworths or Coles. So there's local, robust competition. Plus, in addition, as I've said, and I've been at pains to, with good intent, explain, we do take a national pricing approach to groceries across the whole of Australia, and we make sure those national prices are competitive relative to Aldi or Costco or Chemist Warehouse, and those benefits are reflected across our network as they should be.
We've got a very outstanding export cherry business, cherry sector in Tasmania, Mr. Banducci, and it wouldn't surprise me to learn that you'd picked for them earlier in your career, because you've been cherry-picking answers all day here today. I do urge you to have a think about my advice to you around the Senate's capacity to hold witnesses in contempt for refusing to answer legitimate questions. The committee will now take a 15-minute break. In session in the Senate Select Committee on Supermarket Prices. Mr Banducci, further to the advice I gave you just prior to the break, which is that it is open to the Senate to hold the witness in contempt for refusing to answer a legitimate question. I also feel compelled to advise you that a person failing to comply with a lawful order of a committee may be found, as I've said, to be in contempt of the Senate, and that in accordance with Section 7 of the Parliamentary Privileges Act 1987, subject to a penalty of up to 6 months imprisonment or a fine of not exceeding $5,000. I want to make sure you're aware of those matters before we proceed any further. So in the light of that advice, can I just ask you again whether you accept that return on equity is an accepted measure of assessing a company's profitability?
Senator, As I've said, the way we measure our performance and profitability is our return on investment and total shareholder return. I do recognise that financial institutions might have different ways they do things, but that's not the way we do it. This is the way we measure it, and it's the right way to measure it in the context of the industry we operate in.
I'm not asking you how you do it, Mr. Banducci. You're entitled to do whatever you like, but when you're before a Senate committee, my advice to you is to answer the questions that are put to you by me as chair of this committee. So leaving aside what your preferred measure is, leaving aside what you do in your board meetings or in your senior executive team meetings or within your corporation, leaving those matters aside, do you accept that ROE, return on equity, is a standard and accepted measure of the profitability of a company?
Senator, we measure return on investment, which we think is the right way of measuring profitability in a company. You put $1 in, and what return do you get out? In our case, we get 10 cents out from the $1 we put in, and I don't think it's a coincidence that our total return TSR over the last 5 years is also 10%, which becomes a 3% dividend back to our hard-working retail shareholders.
Last chance, Mr. Banducci. Do you accept that return on equity is an accepted measure of the financial profitability of a company?
Senator, we measure return on investment. We think that is the right way to measure profitability in the grocery sector. I'm not commenting on financial services. I'm commenting on the sector that I operate in.
All right, the hearing is suspended. The committee will have a short private meeting. So, is on. The committee is back in session. Mr Banducci, the committee's had a discussion about the situation in which we collectively find ourselves, and off the back of that discussion, I just want to, out of an abundance of caution and providing an abundance of clarity to you, I just want to ask you a very simple question, which is, do you know what the return on equity was for the Woolworths Group in the last financial year?
Senator, thank you for the question. I'm here to be constructive and to be helpful because we have important issues before us on the cost of living of Australians. I have been authentic and clear in answering the question that as we assess profitability in our sector, I look at return on investment and total shareholder returns. Those are the numbers we look at, those are the numbers in our remuneration system, and that's where I focus. Return on equity actually does vary, as you would be aware, by month or depending on where share prices are, and I don't focus on that. I don't know it because that's not where the focus is. The focus is you put $1 in, what return do you get out? And that's where we focus, and that's what we are focused on doing. And when you look at it that way, you see us making a fair return, and it's a 10% in return of funds employed after tax. And you see us making a fair return in the context of the stock market, a 10% total shareholder return over 5 years, which is the average of the ASX top 100 over that period.
In that reasonably lengthy response, Mr Banducci, did I hear you say that you didn't know what the return on equity is for the Woolworths Group in the last financial year?
Since you heard me say I do not focus on it given it changes over time, and therefore it's just not where our focus is, as it shouldn't be. It's return on investment.
I do understand that's not where your focus is, Mr Banducci. You've repeatedly made that statement to the committee. I'm asking you very simply, do you know what the return on equity was over the last financial year for the Woolworths Group? Do you know that?
Senator, I focus on our return on investment and our total shareholder return. Those are the numbers I know, those are the numbers I focus on, and those are the numbers we should be judged on.
Yes. Thank you, Mr Banducci. I know that you know those other numbers. I've repeatedly asked you whether you know the ROE. You haven't answered that question. I want to advise you that if you don't know what the return on equity was for your group on average over the last financial year, you can just simply say so. You can just say that to the committee, and if you do that, I will simply ask you to take the question on notice and come back to the committee with the answer. So I'm asking you again, do you know what the return on equity for your corporation was in the last financial year?
Senator, that is not what I focus on. I don't know what the number is specifically. Happy to take the question on notice.
You don't know?
I focus on what is key for us.
Please, this is important, Mr Banducci. This is very important because it is open to the Senate to hold you in contempt, and that carries potential sanctions, including up to 6 months imprisonment for you. That's why this is a critical matter, so I just ask you to address your mind with absolute clarity, please, to the question I am asking. I'm not asking what you focus on, Mr Banducci. That's not relevant to this discussion. What is relevant is what you know. Do you know what your return on equity was in the last full financial year? Just yes or no, please, Mr Banducci.
Senator, I've tried to be very specific in saying what we focus on. That is where my focus is. So return on investment, $1 in, and what our return is out, and what is our shareholder return. Those are the numbers I focus on.
Do you know what your ROE was? Like, it's a simple, just yes or no. Do you know or not, Mr Banducci?
Senator, I will take the question on notice. I don't focus on it. I don't focus on it.
In order to take it on notice, you'll have to inform the committee that you don't know the answer. That's the point I'm making. So I want to be clear with you. If you simply say that you don't know and you'll take the question on notice, we can move on. We can move on. but you will need to explicitly inform the committee that you don't know the answer. Do you know the answer to that question or not?
Senator, I don't focus on it. It will probably be in a document somewhere, but it's not a number I focus on and therefore know in detail, no.
You don't know it?
I don't focus on it, Senator.
Okay,
I focus on return on investment.
Right, so I think we're getting somewhere just before you come in, Senator Pratt. So just to be clear, your evidence is you don't know the answer to that question.
Senator, I told you I don't focus on it. It's not the numbers that drive our industry. The way our industry should be assessed is the total return on investment and total shareholder return. That is the way our industry should be assessed. I can't comment on other sectors like the banking industry and how they think about it. I'm just saying that's what we focus on. Those are the key metrics I get on a half-year and a full-year basis, and that's where my focus is.
If I may interject, please, Chair. Mr Banducci, this is a very, very important Senate inquiry. We're in the midst of a significant cost of living crisis where people can't afford to pay their rent, they can't afford to pay their mortgages, and they're struggling to fill up their shopping trolley. Our question, what Senator McKim is asking, is very simple. Do you know the answer? If you do, tell us. If you don't know the answer, tell us and take it on notice. So what we are seeking is, yes, I know it is X. No, I do not know. I will take it on notice. They're the two options. We're not wanting to know what you focus on. We're wanting to know the answer to that simple question.
Thank you, Senator. The heart of the question is how we assess the performance.
The heart of the question
that's how we measure it.
Sorry, Senator Kovacic, thank you very much for your assistance. Mr Banducci, the heart of the question is not how you or your executive team or the board assess anything. That is not only is that not the heart of the question, it's not even vaguely relevant to the question. The question is, just to be clear, do you personally, Mr Brad Banducci, do you know what the return on equity was for Woolworths in the last financial year? Do you know the answer to that? Do you know what the ROE was for Woolworths in the last financial year or not? It's an abundantly simple question. It would really assist the committee, Mr Banducci, if you would simply answer it with clarity for the committee.
Senator said, I don't focus on that number. It is not a number we focus on and not a number we report to. We focus on these numbers that I've talked to. If it helps the committee in terms of us moving on, I don't know that number and I'm happy to take it on notice.
So I'll take that you have answered that question now by saying that you don't know the return on equity for your for Woolworths in the last financial year. That's what you've just said.
Within the context of assessing the performance of Woolworths, Senator, and the number way we assess performance.
There's no context around this, Mr Banducci. Sorry, please don't hedge here. There's no context to this question apart from the context where you are giving evidence to a Senate committee and it is open to the Senate to hold you in contempt and imprison you for up to 6 months if you do not comply with an order of this committee. That is the context of this question. So I think you have said, and I'm just asking you to confirm this, I think your evidence to the committee is you don't know what the return on equity was for Woolworths in the last financial year and you would like to take the question on notice. Could you please just answer yes or no whether that is your evidence to the committee?
Senator, yes, I will take it on notice and we will come back and provide.
No, but yes, just to be clear, yes, when you say yes, that is yes, I do not know, and yes, you'll take it on notice. Are you answering yes to both parts of that question?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, thank you, Mr Banducci. You don't know what the ROE for Woolworths is in the last financial year. Mr Banducci, you are paid over $8 million a year to be the CEO of the Woolworths Group. You've received, since you started as CEO, over $65 million from Woolworths for the job that you are doing. Farmers are being screwed over at the farm gate. Your workers are being done over and subjected to unsafe working conditions. You're price gouging your customers. You've profited obscenely on a personal and corporate level from your domination of market power. How can it possibly be that someone who's getting paid over $8 million a year doesn't know the return on equity for your corporation in the last financial year when it is an absolutely standard accepted measure of the profitability of a company? How can you not know that figure?
Senator, let me first say we don't agree with the assertions that we are price gouging. We're working very hard on an everyday basis to provide value for consumers, and they need it, and our goal is to help them. Secondly, as I've been at pains to point out on more than one occasion, the way we measure performance and the way my remuneration is driven is based on a number of factors. Number one being actually our voice of the customer, or how we resonate with the customer. Number two being our team. And within that context then, our return on investment and our total shareholder return. Those are the numbers we focus on. Those are the numbers that drive our business, and my compensation is aligned with those. I'm extremely privileged to be the CEO of Woolworths. I never take it for granted. I get up every day and work as hard as I can to focus on our customers and our team. Everything I'm saying is in the context of the way we look at performance and what we think is important for the communities we're privileged to serve, as well as for the team members we represent, and importantly, the superannuation funds and retail investors we also represent.
All right. Senator Cadell.
Mr Banducci, thanks for coming. I have some process questions and some numbers that you may need to take on notice first, and then some details. We put a question forward for the margins of the business historically over 20 years, because the evidence before the committee is this has been a 20-year creeping problem, not a 2-year catch-up problem. And we certainly got EBIT and NPAT data. Going through your annual reports in 23, it says you had a 26.8% gross margin across all. That's on page 22. But that says that's up 51 basis points. Going back to 2022 annual report, it says 29.7% gross margin, which is hard to see how 26.8 is up 29.7 basis points. I don't understand the maths, that's why we asked that. Could you supply the data from for 20 years, for financial year 04 to financial year 03 on gross margin in the supermarket sectors?
Can I take that on notice, Senator, and come back to you just to make sure we do it on a comparable basis, because these things do change somewhat over time, but I understand the question.
And I believe it's probably available because one of the answers for the 2022 financial year points out that the increased growth was 79 basis points in groceries, in supermarkets. It was hurt by a lower basis points in Big W, that measured. And going back in 2004, in the annual report, it mentions a gross margin of 24.91. So that data has been collected historically.
I'll just make sure it's on a like-for-like basis, Senator.
Okay, thank you very much. And if not, supply what you've got and why that is not on a like-to-like basis. So when we go through a number of things, we've talked about lane banking, we've talking about stores, your definition of how long you've got a store for, how long it goes on the books. In your system, in your SAP system, when does it go into the system with the store number, one of your stores that's proposed or developed?
I'll answer it broadly, if I may, Senator, and come back with specifics. The date we've got approval to build the store is when it creates a store number. So
if I'm looking at 1049 Waratah Supermarket, 1040 Supermarket in Kurri Kurri, that are in your system currently, they are approved.
Senator, can I take that on notice? It's just not on top of the specifics of how that system works. But
right. On your SAP system at the moment, given the divestiture of BWS, Dan Murphy's, why did Dan and BWS still come up in your SAP system for store codes and deliveries and buildings programs?
We still provide them with services, Senator. As in the demerger, we still ended up with a whole range of services. I assume this is the reason they're there, by the way, that we provide them. We still would manage deliveries to the back dock of the supermarket, and those deliveries would go through it to the BWS, or cleaning of stores and things like that. So in many cases, they're a subtenant of the supermarket. But in other cases, there would just be transition service arrangements in place to service them when they're standalone stores, if you know what I mean.
Okay. The document I've been given lists 64 New South Wales store numbers, of which 6 are, I think, being built since. Can you give... so in your system, I think similar question to that, and I've given the examples of the supermarkets 10049 Waratah, 10040 Curry, but they go through right throughout the state of New South Wales specifically I'm talking about. Can you tell me on notice the longest time any of those have been in without being built? And I will supply you the store numbers after this on notice, so you've got time to do that. And the longest time planned for it to be opened from today. So how long they've been there and how long they will be going ahead. Thank you very much. When we go on to the margins and gross margins, and you said yourself some beautiful quote this morning, big numbers can look deceiving. And in supermarkets, we are dealing with very big numbers, and I think they can be very deceiving. The gross margin change over time is important because there is evidence before this committee that you use excess funds, that you use buying power, rental power, the ability to buy sites and or businesses at overmarket. So the excess funds you create in your trading give you the weaponry to reduce competition. How do you feel about that?
Senator, we wouldn't agree with that statement. Our ability to invest is based on the conversation we've had this morning on our return on funds employed, and that's the basis on which we then drive investment in our business. So it's not something I would agree with.
But if we go to returns of funds employed, isn't more than 25% of that, more than $5 billion, actually intangible?
I would need to go back and look at the calculations. They include, as you know, the capitalisation of the leases and the returns that we get. So,
and trade debtors and creditors and everything like that. But I believe more than a quarter on your last annual return of your funds employed is intangible. It is really money for nothing. They are copyrights, they are patents, they are goodwill, they are these sorts of things. And you include that as returns on funds employed.
Senator, they're things we've spent money on and we need to demonstrate a return on them. So they're a different form of asset, but they're things we've spent money on, so we do need to have a return on it.
Okay. When we go to the process specifically evidence before this committee about the Milton Shopping Centre.
The Milton, sorry, Senator.
We go to the potential that a Woolworths-friendly developer is buying the Elmore Vale Centre in New South Wales. When we talk about another supermarket, I think it might have been Coles, not yourselves, making an over-the-top offer to buy a South Australian IGA, where they step in. How is that not using your big wallet to reduce competition when we are taking independent supermarkets that are doing well out of play?
So, Senator, can I answer broadly and then come back to the specifics, if you don't mind? In the last 5 years, we haven't bought one IGA store. In general,
have you tried?
The one that was reported today is CCC that we have not been able to achieve was the Currawong store in the ACT. But we haven't bought one store. That was one, and we reported it today at CCC, and we follow the process there. So it hasn't been something we've done in the last 5 years, very limited over the last 10 or 15 years when I look through the records. So it's not something we do. Our real focus is on growth corridors and how we put stores into growth corridors so we can serve the community that is there. But then from time to time there will be gaps in the network, and we will therefore engage with developers generally on malls that need quite a lot of work and then lean in to help redevelop them. The one that comes to mind for me is Emerton, which is next to Mount Druitt, which is a centre we bought maybe 4 years ago. It already had a Woolworths in it, but we've done a material redevelopment of it to get the parking on grade and safe, as well as put the right specialty retailers around it. Another one that comes to mind is French's Forest. It's Glen Rose, where we've done the same. And in fact, an Aldi joined us in that mall. So we will do those from time to time, but they are exceptions to the rule, and it's only where we have a demonstrable gap in the context of our business.
Okay. Is flooding the market with stores, and I notice you spoke about the threat of Costco, you talked about the threat of all these other grocery makes. In your own annual report, you said that this year, in the 23 annual report, 24.5 million customers served weekly. That is an increase of 8% on the 22.7 million customers served weekly in the previous financial report. You are still growing, aren't you?
Senator, by the way, the interesting thing, what happened in COVID and post-COVID is people are shopping more frequently in COVID. They went and shopped less frequently and got bigger baskets. So part of what you're seeing is the changing nature of the basket being purchased by customers. But the basket still got bigger, but by a lesser amount. I think the basket was about 6% bigger in sales. It's items that we look at in basket, Senator, but broadly we had more items in COVID, and then of course we've had inflation subsequent to COVID and less items in the basket as people have gone back to a more regular shopping pattern, is the way I would typify it. But if you look at the number of stores, which I think is the heart of your question, the amount of square meterage we've put on the ground is lower than the population growth of Australia over the last 10 years. In the last 5 years, we've added a net 5 stores to our supermarkets by year. That's net because in some cases we've closed an old one as we've built a new one and improved the amenity. So we are growing in the last 10 years just slightly lower than the overall population growth of Australia in terms of our square meterage.
But your growth of 6% sales and 8% of customers visiting is exceeding population growth.
Yes, as I say, we need to look through the units of that, and so the customer growth can look better than it is because they're shopping more frequently and buying a smaller basket. The average customer buys 12 items when they go shopping in a supermarket. The number is down at the moment, depending where you are in Australia, to about 10. Some of it is because of these other retailers, focusing on groceries as well, and some of it is just through the increased frequency of the shopper.
Not all evidence has been given in public as part of this proposal. One of the things on pricing and costing of goods is the request for price increases. Now, you said price, good lines, products, all this sort of stuff. There is evidence before the committee yesterday that introduction of new lines when we're talking about range presentations is the opportunity to increase margin expectations. Is that happening as a regular thing? Are we looking at increasing gross margins in stores, expectation in margins across divisions as new product lines are introduced?
Senator, no, the number one issue with the new line is, does it resonate with customers and do we not have it there already? One of the toughest things we have to do as a retailer is for every new product that comes into our store, in effect, one product needs to leave the store. So you need to be comfortable that the new product adds something additional to our customers. So that's by far the biggest issue in making a decision. Is there resonance with the product?
But do we increase profit margin on new lines?
Senator, that on average, we would look at what the average margin is in the category, but that is not a strategy that Woolworths deploys overtly. In some cases it may be true, but that's not an expectation.
In the last 2 years, can you rule out that lines for potential deletion have been saved by increasing margin?
It would all depend on the specifics in the category. Lines that are deleted at Woolworths are ones that don't sell, Senator.
I understand that, but can you rule out that they've been saved by either paying a gap fee or a increase in margin?
Absolutely.
You can rule that out?
I can rule that out in the sense that if doing that didn't lead to more sales, which it doesn't, therefore they wouldn't be there. Lines, products in our stores are there at the behest of our customers, and when they don't resonate, we rotate and we change the range that is in the store.
Going down to some specifics, your treatment of small suppliers. Another statement from you today is you're talking about choice. What we're looking at is power, because you can have 100 stores. If one of them sell one item and you sell 1,000, power is elsewhere. So I will give you a specific story.
Sure.
Within the last 2 years, one of your meat suppliers in New South Wales who grows lambs, you had an oversupply issue. You phoned that supplier and asked them to delay delivery by 2 weeks of their lambs. 2 weeks later, the lambs were then oversized and out of spec, and you fined that supplier for supplying those goods. How is that fair when they are fixing your problem to actually go back against a small supplier and punish them for that?
Senator, I'd love to take that on notice and look at the specifics of it, because that is not the way we would expect to operate. If you don't mind me making the difference between fresh is what you're talking about there and long life groceries, one of the key things we're doing is making sure we get the right range in every local community. So you've seen the range change by community. The reason for that is, firstly, our customers want and demand that and expect that from us. But secondly, it gives more opportunities for small suppliers to supply us. And having more local Australian producer suppliers is a good thing. It's a good thing for us as well as our consumers.
Okay. When you set fruit and veg, let's go there, the specifications for goods.
Yep.
We've heard evidence of people dumpster diving for food that's thrown out. We won't go there. But in Tasmania, we heard evidence of a cauliflower and broccoli, I think, supplier. Up to 40% of their goods gets ploughed back in before you'll even look, because it could be too big, too small, have a spot on it, these sorts of things. Are we not setting the specification of food so high that viable, good food, edible food, nutritious food is being wasted and artificially pumping up prices because farmers get nothing for those things?
Look, I think this is a very good question. The way we try and set our specifications on the products we sell is based on our customers' expectations. And, you know, in particular freshness, by the way, but just the broad. In some cases, they will judge the visuals and assume the expectation on freshness. So it is customer-driven expectations we have. We are aware at times this leads to the unintended consequence of challenges. Where we can, and there's a demonstrable major event, we will adjust the specification. We talked about bananas earlier, but Cyclone Jasper last year was a really good case study, hit far north Queensland, October, November. We adjusted the specification on bananas coming out of the region for that period. They just had more markings on them than usual to address the fear that half the crop could be left on farm. So we do try and dynamically do that. And then very importantly, in the last 2 years, we've introduced what we call the odd bunch, which is what it says. It's 20% cheaper in our stores, but it gives an ability for a product that doesn't fit the normal expectation. A customer who wants value can get that product, and hopefully it prevents it from being ploughed
But
in.
if farmers could get some money for their 20 to 40% they're ploughing back in, surely that would they'd be able to sell other stuff cheaper and Australians could eat better. Aren't you after Instagram-ready food, not nutritional food?
Look, as I say, the odd bunch is one mechanic for doing it, and it is going very well, Senator. And can we expand it? Yes, are we working to? Absolutely. We think that's another very important mechanic. But as I say, the key thing we're trying to balance is consumers do judge us on freshness at home, and there's nothing an Australian hates more than throwing something away. So there is a balance there. But I do take your point.
You gave evidence earlier about the length of time for these small buyers, fruit and veg, and the turnaround there, and the market sets the price. I've received a text while we've been sitting here from a grower, and it tells them that they have to please align. I love the language we use. I read in Bunnings yesterday that you're invited to take part in a review, which means come or you're out. A whole lot of buyers on a sheet I have been given, where they've put their bids in and their quantity, have this line: please align to $24. What am I meant to read that? I read it as, you will not get purchase offers unless you give us this price.
Senator, thank you. I'd need to look into the specifics of that if you're happy for us to do that. I'm very happy to make sure.
But the general language, on a buying group, they put in their prices, and the system we've got is this: on a Wednesday or a Monday, they're putting their quantity and their value. On a Tuesday, they get, this is what we'll offer you. On a Wednesday, if they agree to meet that price, they may get a contract. That's not a market setting, that's a dictation.
I can only talk to what Woolworths does, Senator, not the email, and happy to take that on notice for saying come back. I think this, again, we come back to fruit and veg. This is a really key issue for all of us to lean into. Just so everyone's aware, there's about 6.35 million tonnes produced a year. We take about 0.9 million tonnes or 0.92 or whatever the number is. We're about 16% of the overall market on fruit and veg, and about 65% of it is sold. Half is sold through the markets in Sydney and Melbourne and everywhere else, and there's a clearing price.
Yep.
And then the other half is engaged with directly by retailers such as us. So we're somewhere between 15 and 20% of the market. When we do that, we do send out to our growers, and the 350 growers we work with intensively, and within a 2-week period, ask them to confirm volume and what they see as the value, given that they do sell products to many other ways. We then look at those prices and agree a price with them in the context of delivery into the distribution centre closest to them. So there is a market clearing mechanic that happens there, and it can be good or bad, I guess, depending on the week in terms of when it happens. But we don't try to explicitly force everyone down to a price. We take into account where they grow in, what the quality of the product is that they grow in, and also the volume of the product.
But forcing down a price, please align to 24. What are you doing if you're not trying to force down a price there?
I'd need to look at the specifics there, Senator.
The other thing we've got is that the number of people coming for price rises for things and justifying has increased lately. Evidence we've got, and this is a chance to dispute because it's been a single source, is that where people have asked for price rises of a certain amount and they've been mitigated, is the word we hear a lot, to lower prices, the recommended RRP has still gone up by the original price ask. So if someone asks for a 10% price rise at their cost, and they've mitigated down to 5 as the example we got, the recommended retail price has still gone up 10% on the original ask. Has that never happened?
That is not the normal practice.
Not the normal practice, I accept that.
No, and it was one of the supplementary questions we got, Senator, and we did answer it, but if I'll just... we get a price increase, we engage on it constructively in the 30 days of the code, we agree whatever the number is. In general, our shelf price goes up by the price increase with the supplier. That is true, and I'll look at those numbers over a 6 or 12-month basis. That's what happens on average. There may be specific instances where that doesn't work perfectly. It might go down or up, actually.
Yeah, I understand.
And that'll depend on the price architecture in a category, because you want to have a logical architecture for a customer of $2.90 versus $3, or do you have a $1.50 or $2? So there is a price architectural conversation that takes place, which may lead to some exceptions, but it is by exception. And invariably, it is always within the recommended retail price of the supplier. There would be very few instances where we went above an RRP. We need to be competitive. You
mentioned you sell the odd bunch 20% cheaper than the... Do you pay only 20% less for the goods for the workers, or do you make a greater margin on the odd bunch?
We don't make a greater margin on the odd bunch. Senator, I know a lot of numbers. I don't know that number. If I could take that on notice.
Can you get a range example across odd bunch versus normal? That would be great. And probably the last question is expected margins in different categories. So they range. We're hearing more and more, I think even in the Emerson report, they're talking about buyers not being rewarded for meeting necessarily expected markups and these sorts of things. Do you do it on products, or do you do it on ranges? Do you do it in categories? I've heard pantry is anywhere between 30 to 50, fruit and veg up to 100, although I've got a message today that limes are being purchased for $3.50 and being sold for $14 today in your supermarkets in New South Wales, so that's a great margin. So how do you set your margin? Is it specific product lines? Is it SKU? Is it range? Is it different departments? How is that set? And what are the expectations?
Thank you. Can I just, by the way, on the limes, just one important issue. We don't buy farm gate, we buy wholesale, so there would still be a picking, grading, at times packaging. We'll buy that.
Probably not $8 or something like that.
But anyway, I just logged the difference, and I'd need to look at that example. If you look at the category managers, and again, there was a supplementary question, and we did try and elaborate, so I won't. I'll just go through the high points, if I may. The category manager is judged on the customer resonance and sales of the category. That's the number one. 0 times a high margin is still 0. So we look at the category and how do we get resonance with the customers on our offer in the category, so it's in those 12 items they purchase on a weekly basis. So basket participation, customer resonance is the number one issue. And then within the context of that, we'll look at making sure we're extremely price competitive. And margin would be one of the factors that sits there, but it is not the overwhelming factor. It is about the resonance of the category and what we're trying to achieve. Now, to your broader point, categories do have different margins associated with them. And I know there were a lot of questions last week, but this is quite an important issue. The correct way to look at margin is not the gross margin, it is all the costs associated with selling the product when it gets
refrigeration, all that sort of thing.
And so different products come through different supply chains. Some we have to clear, or painfully we have to dump on occasion, which are mainly in fresh. And then long life, it's a very different process. So it's the variable profit contribution that counts on each category, and that's the way we look at it. But there would be different margins across the categories based on that. In general, the margins in fresh on a like-for-like contribution basis would tend to run lower than the margins in long life products, which sort of makes sense because of you don't have all that extra handling and odd times dumps or markdowns on the product. And we also think it's a good thing because we're very focused on value for customers does start with getting fresh food into their baskets and into their households.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about the, sorry, I said it was the last one question, I lied. The BCA small retailers paid at within 14 days. Yes. The BCA guidelines are less than $5 million, fits that criteria. How many of your suppliers are less than $5 million per annum?
We have a lot of them. Can I take that on notice?
Yeah,
I think it's a really great question. By the way, it's 14. In some cases, we do 7 as well, depending on the nature of the product. But I can come back and give you the specifics.
And the last was a follow-up to Senator Kovacic's question. You said that you pay for wastage once it's delivered to you. Don't you put a wastage fee in the calculation of people when they sell you goods of how much you expect to waste?
It depends. In long life categories, sometimes products get dented, I guess, if you're looking at tins and so on. So at times there can be an agreed fee that comes to that, but we don't explicitly do that in fresh food. No, we buy.
So if one of your employees knocks over a container full of cans and everything like that, who pays for it?
Us.
But you've already factored in a denting factor.
Well, we're talking. Sorry, again, if you don't mind, Senator, splitting fresh and long life. In long life, there will be some agreement that sometimes there's some dents or whatever. We just agree a fee to it, and we pay for everything in addition to that. I can give you the details. It's not a big thing. In fresh, once we've accepted a fresh product, everything up post that is to our account, which it should be.
Okay. Why have so many processors and so many suppliers refuse to give open evidence about Woolworths and Coles, but been happy to tell us privately what's going on?
I can't talk to the specifics. I can only talk to what we try and do, which is and I noticed that they weren't one of the parties that presented here. The Advantage Group is probably the biggest survey company between retailers and suppliers in the world. They run a very robust annual survey called the Mirror Survey, which is paid for by suppliers, gives us very detailed data on how we are behaving in respect of our suppliers by category. We review that as a key input into the performance modifier or performance bonus adjustment of our category managers. So there's a very detailed process that goes on annually. We then supplement that with a bi-monthly review also by the Advantage Survey, which just drills down and gives us more immediate material. Get that every 2 months. It has in the order of 500 suppliers who've dealt with us in the last 2 months provide feedback to that. Again, we take that very seriously and review that, and again it goes back into the feedback and performance for our team. So we would like to be at a higher bar than we see on average, and those are two of the mechanics we use to help us assess our progress in that regard.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thanks, Senator Cadell. Senator Tyrrell.
Thanks, Banducci. I put out the call to people in Tasmania to ask you questions. So I'm going to ask you some questions from the people that actually shop in your stores. Annabelle, who lives in Latrobe, she wants to know, she's been told that Woolworths import all the meat into Tasmania, that it's pre-packaged, pre-done elsewhere. Is that true?
Yes, I know a lot of things about a lot of things as Senator, but can I take that one on notice? We do try and source, and certainly the fruit and veg is sourced from Tasmania.
Yeah.
I just need to check, and was it beef that she purchased?
Just meat in general, because I know that you don't really have butchers in every store now too. So employment opportunities within your stores have gone down.
I will take, if I could take that, I'll get back to you very quickly on that. I just need to just check with our team.
Thank you. And also Ken wants to know, how can it be believed that farmers receive fair prices for meat, fruit or vegetables when there is hardly any competition? And this is mainly Tasmania-centric.
As I say, we think there is, and obviously there's a very big independent trade in Tasmania, as pointed out before, in terms of the number of independent stores there relative to Woolworths and Coles. So we think there is hopefully a robust market. But the thing I would observe, which I do think is important, the cost of transportation across from Tasmania to the mainland is material.
Which is the reason Aldi won't come.
Yeah, the other way around, by the way. So I couldn't talk to the specifics on how Tasmanian growers fare when they have to move their product out of Tasmania if there's not enough demand in Tasmania. Senator McKim talked about the very successful cherry orchard business, Mr. Hansen, and a lot of that actually is taken by air freight up into Asia. So it's a very different circumstance. But I would happy to come back with some thoughts, in particular on the challenges of getting back across the Tasman into Victoria.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. And Lorraine wants to know how much profit you want as an organisation. At what point will Woolworths be satisfied with the profit margins that they've got? And I'll tack on a little bit to that with how big they have grown and the market share that they have.
Thank you, Senator. In all of the numbers that we provide, if you look at our net profit after tax over the last 10 years, you'll see it's actually gone down. It hasn't gone up. The 2.7 was about 3.4 10 years ago, and I think we provided that in the supplementary material. And that's true in the other margin lines as well. So we make lower margin, but we are fortunate to get more customer engagement with us, which is why you see us growing. On average, in the last 10 years, our market share is actually, depending on how you want to measure it, in supermarkets remained static. In grocery, actually gone down ever so slightly. So we are growing in line, really, on average, just a little bit, depending on what period, just above or at population. But the only way we succeed is if customers want to shop us.
Yeah.
And so we sit there at the behest of customers such as Lorraine. And so, we've got to fight for her basket and justify ourselves to her.
I hear that, but because the market in Tasmania is limited, and I agree, we have some great smaller retailers, Woolies and Coles are the only ones that people recognise because they've got their frequent flyers, they've got, the everyday rewards. So people try to maximise their kickback from you. So in Tasmania, you are very limited as to where you can go because mainstream shopping is where the best prices are. How can you explain to people that they're actually getting bang for buck and you're not profiteering off them when that's not how they feel? Is it the communication from you that's failing, or is it our understanding of what you're communicating?
It's a great question. Clearly we can do better, Senator.
Yep.
And one of the things, very productive things that's come out of this process so far has been the whole topic of unit prices and how we do them and how you can see them in a store. In July, you'll see a material improvement in that. It's been one of the very practical things coming out.
Because I'm confused.
It's literally come out of this process, Senator. We already did it, but I feel maybe I'm showing my age, but I can't see it as well as I would like to, and I think it's really important. So you'll see us doing much more and things like that. Clearly, we need to do a better job of also calling out everyday low prices, which give certainty on essential items. And so you'll see a lot of work going on for us on doing that. We've done that, but I think we can do a much better job. And then, the truth is, Senator, what our customers want to see are prices come down, and we need to work with our suppliers, mainly in long life categories, to deliver that at the shelf edge. And that is up to us. It is starting to come through, but we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and we need to focus on it.
Monica wants to know whether the balancing of consumer and shareholder opinion is skewed in favour of the shareholder.
as we've talked about earlier, if you look at our overall return over 3 to 5 years of 10%, we think on average we've got the balance right. Have we got it right in every quarter, half? No. But that's something we continue to work on. I think really important in this balance, though, is also our team. And we've had some good questions on that, as well as treating the supplier. So it's the customer, the shareholder, but also the supplier and the team that we need to work always on balancing.
Yeah. In saying that, like with the producers at home, Senator Goodell mentioned, the waste products. But there are farmers and producers that feel like they're not being heard and recognised in their negotiations with, big supermarkets in general. Like there's mental health problems that go hand in hand with that. Is there plans to actually go in and renegotiate pricing agreements, actually having written agreements rather than verbal/text agreements, which is what we've been hearing too, that is very happenstance?
Well, I think Senator, there clearly are challenges in the fruit and veg industry right now in Australia, and we have an opportunity collectively to lean in. Rest assured of Woolworths' commitment to do that as part of an industry solution. One of the issues that has struck me as I've prepared to be here has been we deal with by wholesale, so it's been packed and graded, and it's been picked, graded and packed. I cannot tell you between our grower aggregators, the 350 we deal with, and all of the suppliers that they supply, how that works. It's not material or information I have. So there is an opportunity for more price transparency, which would be the starting point to start engaging on the kinds of topics you're talking about, is how did we get the right price signal to that community to make more informed decisions on what they choose to plant or grow.
You are a big employer, and I thank you for that, because my son was employed by Woolworths and he's learnt some very good skills from the management team and the floor staff in Ulverston Woolies. And I've got family and friends who still work for Woolworths and they take pride in their job. But community people believe that automation is decimating retail industry, retail jobs, also warehouse jobs. How do you find the balance so as that places like Tasmania, where industry and businesses are rare and hard to get into, how do you maintain employment into the future?
I think it's a great question, and there's a different question for the stores or the distribution centres. Maybe I could just deal with the distribution centres first and come back to the stores. Yep. Obviously, there is a lot of automation going on there, which just actually improves the work of the team that work in the distribution centre. There are less people, but they're actually safer, and the job is more sustainable. I know, Senator Stirl, you had quoted on Moorebank. We will have 800 people working in Moorebank, but a very different experience for them, not the huge loads that they currently work at the moment. So there is a lot of automation going on in distribution centres with implications for jobs. In stores, actually, what we're trying to do is use technology to help our team do a better job of serving our customers. And one of the fastest growing ways that you check out of a Woolworths right now is through our direct-to-boot service, where we will put it in your boot. This is a high value in particular to mothers who run in households and they're very busy with the kids, that they can come and flow through. Actually, more saver people use it than anyone else, because they can balance their budget through the online shopping and check how much they spend and check us against our competitors. So those things have led to the fact that we're actually getting more people working for us, but what they're doing is changing. We do need to do direct to boot. We're asking our team to be more flexible on how they work in our stores. Long gone are the days and the pejoratives of you work the checkout or you work the long life category. We're asking our team to be more multi-skilled so they can work across the store. So that you might work the checkout in the morning, but you might help us make sure that the bread is on shelf in the afternoon, which is a real challenge because of the velocity. So I'm optimistic at a store level. We will continue to grow our team. We have grown it materially in the last couple of years, but the nature of what they do as well will change. And there, where the technology helps us, is telling the team where they need to be or what do they need to know at that point in time. I also should add, it's providing a lot of support to us on the issue of violence and aggression, which is a material issue right now in retail.
I hear that too. Bernadette wants to know too, how many of your shareholders are actually Australian? How many are overseas?
The vast majority, I would say 85% plus, are Australian. It's a mixture of Australian superannuation funds. And then I think we either the first or second biggest have retail shareholder base. It was us and Telstra. I don't know where they sit relative to us. So really important for us that we get a fair return back to our shareholders. And in that context, actually, the dividend is not unimportant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Terrell. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr Banducci, for your participation today. I mean, a very, very key issue in the inquiry is the level of transparency around the price setting and, more broadly, the supplier agreements that happen between Woolworths and your suppliers, particularly in regards to perishable goods. So Dr Emerson has provided an interim report for public consideration. Could you provide us some commentary in regards to your attitudes to that public report? First point. Secondly, what particular new ideas or new initiatives did you give Mr Emerson that have not been incorporated into his interim report thus far?
Thank you, Senator Smith. We're talking about wholesale prices versus retail prices, just to be clear. So, and obviously the wholesale price setting mechanic in long life groceries is very different to fresh, as we've discussed.
Yes. Yep.
And there's a spectrum of the way things work. Every sector we have, I would say, has clear, transparent mechanics around it. Fruit and veg is the one where this market price is one where there are questions and challenges which I think are legitimate, but the rest of them are pretty clear in how we engage, what we do. As say meat, you can look at the Eastern Standard Cattle Index or the Sheep Farm Index and so on. So I do think there's work to do, as I've called out, on fruit and veg and how we give more comfort to everyone on the prices and what they are, and so people can make informed decisions. The rest of it, I think, works well, I think effectively. Then you have the issue of behaviour, Senator, which is the one that is covered by the code. Are our buyers or category managers behaving behaviourally the right way with our suppliers? And I think the steps that have been taken really do continue to lift that. What I thought was good in the report was the consideration given to maintaining the informal characteristics of the system that has been refined since 2018 and the formal sanctions and mechanics that come from a mandatory system with a mandatory penalty process. Because I think we want to have both. If we get to the point that there's a fine given and we accept that and we certainly will engage on that process, that's sort of the end of the road. You want to catch these issues early, you want to change the behaviour of your team, which is where we're focused, and so the informal conversations are so key. So I think Dr Emerson has done a good job to date of managing those two together. The one thing he hasn't done, and I understand why, but it is one that we called out, and I know a few other businesses, retailers have, is the whole issue on small suppliers, and they are a different group. They just are in terms of their sophistication, often their balance sheets, how they behave, and how do we continue to lift our game, in particular with that group. It is there, but I think there could be more done. I understand why that's not as done overtly as we would prefer, but we think everyone, including ourselves, can do and continue to do a better job of small suppliers in packaged goods as well as fresh that are Australian made. So that would be the one issue I'd call out. There's a lot of controversy around code arbiters and whether because one is paid by Woolworths or Coles, therefore they're captured by us. I would just observe to that they're not, and if you've met our code arbiter, Helen McKenzie, the ex-managing partner of Ashurst, I think you would get comfort out of that. But there's the trade-off between independence and knowledge. She knows enough about Woolworths, and if she gets a question now, she knows how to address it and where to go, and she knows how to interpret it. That's the trade-off between the independence versus knowledge, and it's a difficult one. I can see both arguments. I think Dr. Emerson has tried to capture that very effectively, that you use the code arbiter unless you feel uncomfortable, and then you can go to an independent process. So it's a challenging one, but I feel that's been well managed in the context of the recommendations to date.
But so why is the small supplier experience not better captured in the Emerson?
Just as a personal issue for Woolies, we would prefer a much more structured small supplier process. It's just different, the informality and the knowledge that we need to give to them.
So Mr. Banducci, when you say small supplier, should I hear in that unsophisticated supplier?
I don't want to, just like I don't like to talk about our customers negatively.
In terms of perhaps, not business knowledge and awareness, and not their capacity to be a supplier, but just in terms of the level of support that they might have, because they're a smaller organisation.
Yes, processes, procedures, often team. So
yes.
There is, and by the way, we are doing this, and I would just commend, Mr. Leptos, independent reviewer, for calling these issues out to us. We are addressing them. So I don't want to overplay the issue, Senator, but it is one, just if you wanted the colour of the kinds of conversations we've had with Dr. Emerson.
So in your response, you have highlighted a very, very important issue, and I think it is perhaps one of the two primary issues of this inquiry, and that is the behaviour of buyers that represent, in your case, Woolworths. What is the level of awareness that you have about the behaviour of people representing Woolworths when they're engaging with smaller suppliers or those in perishable good market?
So thank you, Senator. As mentioned to Senator Cadell, the Advantage survey and the robust reporting that they provide with the Mirror report, which ranks the top 20 retailers in Australia in the way they deal with suppliers in groceries in general, but plus a few other categories, is a key process. I meet quarterly with the head of Advantage Group, John McLaughlin, to talk about it and qualitative factors of where we can improve. There's always things we can improve. And then we've supplemented that with this bi-monthly survey that Advantage do for us, just so that we don't wait a year to take action. And so we get that every second month. Those results are published. We're on wave 48 right now inside Woolworths Group, and that's done by category, and we then use that to engage with our team if there are issues or things we see that we feel uncomfortable with. We are trying, where we can, to set ourselves a much higher bar than the grocery code, which is as it should be.
So, because to be totally frank, there have been and are constantly issues being raised about how Woolworths does engage. And in Mr. Emerson's report, he does make the observation of recommendation 5 that how important it is for supermarkets to have systems in place for senior managers to monitor commercial decisions made by their buying teams and category managers. So I'm just curious to know how agile are you as a CEO and is your management team in responding to and hopefully stamping out what would be broadly characterised as misuse of market power at that very, very sort of big starting point of the supply chain? To what extent are you aware, and to what extent are you responsible?
I'm certainly trying to be as aware of it as possible, and I'm certainly responsible. We have put in a process which again came out through the independent reviewers' engagement with us, that if any supplier has an issue, we then monitor the performance of the supplier to make sure that the buyer has not taken any action against the supplier for raising an issue, and that is actually actively monitored. The name of the process, I'm sorry, escapes me. I can take that on notice and provide it to you, by the head of Woolworths Supermarkets, Natalie Davis. So we're very sensitive to the issue that if someone raises an issue, that there's no consequence on them, and we actively monitor that. What Dr. Emerson is referring to in that clause, we think we do. We think we can do a better job of it, and we will certainly lean more and more into it. We do want to provide the safe harbour for suppliers being able to raise issues.
It was disappointing to get the Woolworths submission and there to not be any sort of substantive suggestions or recommendations about how arrangements could be improved, but I've shared that with your team. I do have a matter, Mr. Banducci, that was raised with me on a visit when I travelled to the southwest of Western Australia at the invitation of Nola Marino, the member for Forest. She brought to my attention someone who had a relationship with Woolworths, and what I'd like to be able to do is send you that information, and I would be most appreciative if you could look at that with a fresh set of eyes, because I'm not sort of satisfied the way that it was dealt with by Woolworths. I'll send that to you, and if I could just have a commitment that you'll give that your personal attention, I'd be most appreciative. Just turning to other matters, how would the existence of a divestiture law change your commercial practices here in Australia?
Thank you, Senator. As we've just talked about, we would love to set our behaviour much higher in a behavioural sense than what's the minimum obligations under the law. So, we do need to set ourselves a higher bar than that, and that's really where our focus is as an organisation.
Does it change any of the commercial decisions that you would make?
Senator, it does create some uncertainty on longer-term investments, but so our focus is making sure that we hold ourselves to a much higher duty than that. I know there's a lot of engagement and conversation around this, and we went through it in New Zealand with the New Zealand Commerce Commission. For long-tailed decisions where there could be some risk, I mean, it does make you want to revisit those. But in general, we really do need to hold ourselves to a higher account.
Just ask if you could come to the conclusion of your questions shortly, please.
Yeah, I will. So,
thank you.
There has been a lot of public attention and media commentary on the behaviour of Woolworths and Coles over perhaps the last 6 months. Can you sort of detail for the committee how, as a result of that sort of public commentary and increased level of scrutiny, what changes you have currently made to the way that you operate as an organisation?
Thank you, Senator.
Has the public scrutiny triggered some tangible changes in the way that you operate?
Senator, we always need to improve, and particularly given the crisis for customers and consumers in the country at the moment. I've read the submissions. There have been ideas and thoughts that have come out of that I've immediately made sure that we've put into action inside the group. So there have been benefits out of this process, plus the review done by Dr. Emerson, plus the other reviews that are going on. So I see this as an opportunity for us to lift our game and help our customers. I've talked to one, and it seems trivial, but it is critically important, the universal desire to see much better efficacy, understanding, and easy ways to see unit prices so you can make the trade-offs. The challenges there. I thought the choice paper on this was excellent, and rest assured of a whole lot of work inside Woolworths. I thought the technology, and I know Senator Tyrrell asked questions on that, was another important one. If you go into our self-checkouts, you may or not realise this, there was a mirror there that people thought was watching them. That mirror is gone. I was quite shocked by it, and I made sure it disappeared the day after that it happened. We always need to double down on privacy, and we've done that, but continue to do that, and I'm continuing to review that policy. Deep dived into the refunds policy, the Rachel Anderson type recommendation to make sure that the policy is clear to our team in store. I've been a bit worried. I'm clear what the policy is, but I'm not always clear that our team follow the policy, so there's a lot of work going on that. I think everything we do can be improved, Senator, and that is the attitude we've taken into this process, and that's the attitude we will take coming out of this process.
Senator Smith, I'm just aware that Senator Pratt has a hard marker.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Senator Smith. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Banducci, can I ask the definition for return on equity in your own 5-year results return on equity is profit after income tax before significant items attributable to shareholders divided by average opening and closing shareholders' equity for the period. That's correct, isn't it?
Senator, yes.
It's from your own Woolworths published 5-year results.
Senator, yes, as I've been at pains to point out, the way we measure performance is our return on investment.
Fine. I understand the answer. Senator McKim put to you that your return on equity was about 26%. Can you confirm that in the 5-year results published by Woolworths, your results were for 2022, 41.2%, and for 2023, 27.8%?
Senator, as I said to Senator McKim, I've taken this question on notice. That is not the number we focus on, and the number that I look at.
I understand that, but nevertheless, you see fit to publish it.
There are a lot of details that are published about Woolworths, Senator, as you would see in our annual report.
Okay, but you're able to confirm those figures? You want to take on notice the confirmation of what's in your own documentation?
I will go back and confirm it, as I said, after the Senator.
Okay. Can I now ask Mr. Banducci, what's the process you go through to monitor prices, and do you buy data about your competitors? Can you tell us a bit about what you do with the massive amounts of data that you collect from consumers who shop at Woolies?
Thank you, Senator. It's a really important issue. One of the unique characteristics of Australian grocery retail, and certainly for us and our key competitors, is that our online prices are the same as our store prices. This isn't true in most overseas geographies, where often there's a surcharge in the online price. So we can scrape each other's websites, I guess is the expression we will use, to check prices and make sure we're in the right place on price. And we do that.
How much might they vary in areas where there's more or less competition?
Well, for Woolworths and broadly, as I understand, Coles, although you'll need to ask them specifically, we follow national prices on groceries, so there's not a lot of variation. That said, we do, of course.
I guess I'm asking, how do you follow? Where do you get your data to follow national prices on groceries?
Well, I'd say we do it on the websites, and we'll do spot checks in our competitor stores as well. So and you'll just need to look at the website for each different geography. Sometimes container deposit scheme differences can drive differences in price, but we would look at the state-based prices and double-check them and make sure we're competitive. And that would be against Coles. It would be against Aldi. It is against IGA, although that's more variable because individual IGA operators will adjust prices, so we follow a broad index there. Chemist Warehouse is one we look at as well, and with the Bunnings move into home care and pet care, we also actively monitor those, as we should, because
you would see it fair for Bunnings to come into the code, as I
Senator, I think anyone who competes in groceries should be held to the same standard. I wouldn't want to overplay that point, whether it's Bunnings or Chemist Warehouse or, as I pointed out earlier, Kmart or even our own Big W. I think we should all be held to the same standard. I think it's just good practice, actually. But we would look at all those prices, Senator, and then we would also overlay on that our view of the basket and what's the volume in the basket. So there is some maths difference between looking at prices on websites and then saying what do people buy, so you can make sure, which is our focus, that our basket is competitive. So when customers come to Woolworths and they buy the 12 items on average, that they get a great price over that basket. And so we do that. One of the things we know Saver Families, which are a key segment that's under pressure now, they'll open the Coles website and they'll start shopping there, and they'll open the Woolworths one and they'll shop and check the basket price. So that includes everything, and they make informed decisions. One of the things you'll notice right now in a grocery store, which is quite stark, and it wasn't a year ago, is people shopping to lists, because the need for discipline on the list becomes key, given a defined amount of money. So you're starting to see a lot of those things become really important, and we're working on a lot of tools to help consumers in there. But we use all of that to make sure that we have a very competitive price index. And then within that, on occasion, we will look and say, well, what is it that families need, and do we need to be sharper on price, or do we need to hold a price when arguably it might go up? And we do try and overlay that as well, where we think it's important, in particular for families. We think if we solve the family challenge, in a way we solve all the other challenges, but that's the way we work through things.
Okay, so I was very pleased to see your move to online receipts, which you can do if you're a rewards member. Can I ask if you're prepared to give rewards members downloadable versions of their transactions, for example in a CSV file or a CSV file for the year, and how we go about looking at making sure that information is provided with unit pricing as well as with specials, etc.
Thanks. And I realised I didn't answer all of your previous questions, Senator, so my apologies, I'll come back to it. E-receipts are really important, saves a lot of time, but it also means that the customer has a copy of all of their purchases from us, which helps them when they want to come to refunds or things like that. So it's an important mechanic. I will take on notice just the technical issues around CSV files, but it's important. On privacy in particular, our data is only used to help our customers or members have better shopping experiences at Woolworths. We do not sell or monetize our data with third parties at all. It is there to help our customers find better value at Woolworths, which is the purpose in which our customers have given it to us.
I understand you don't sell individualised data, but producers and gross manufacturers, I'm told, need to buy data through third parties to find out volumes, etc. Do you sell data about volumes in a particular category? How do you give market indications about what demand is across different product categories? And do you buy, for example, Coles's data through a third party or other people who put that kind of product category and volumes and seasonal data together?
Thank you, Senator. There are two very different forms of data, if you don't mind me just starting there and going into it.
Yeah.
There is the volumes that are bought inside of our stores, the sheer volume of product that's bought by category. That is consolidated and that is sold by scan, as what they call scan data, and it's sold by AC Nielsen on behalf of the industry, and there are various versions of it that you can buy, and you can therefore see what your market share is if you're a consumer goods company. So it's just volume data that goes by category, and it's called scan data. Separately to that, which I think is the heart of your question, is customer data, which says customer X or customer Y did X or Y, and so it's more personalised versions of that. We do not sell that data, but with our suppliers, they can have access to that data if they tell us what segment they're looking for, say a conscious customer or a saver family. Are they buying their product, which helps them at an audience level inform particularly the new product development process. So that data is sold, but it's sold at a segment level. Very importantly, to an earlier question from Senator Smith, we provide a version of all this data I've talked at to our small suppliers free of charge, because we know that they can't afford to buy it, so they can make informed decisions. We only started doing that in the last year, but we are very careful not to, as I say, customers give us data to help them have better shopping experiences at Woolworths.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Pratt. Senator Kovacic for hopefully a short number of final questions.
I will do my best. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Banducci, you've made some comments in your opening remarks about the difficult current circumstances. You call them very challenging circumstances, and where you're trying to provide customers the best possible value. Do you acknowledge that consumers have taken a massive hit across every part of the spectrum of their spending, from rents to mortgages to energy to fuel and obviously to groceries? Suppliers, small suppliers specifically, the small growers and farmers, have also taken massive hits. That there is the perception and the view that the supermarkets have not taken a hit, that the supermarket margins have remained the same. And that is the reason that we have the discourse that we currently have. That is why we have this inquiry. And whether or not, Woolworths and its audit has actually considered what it needs to do in this circumstance, particularly in relation to perhaps prioritising the needs of institutional investors like the Australian super funds, which you mentioned, above and beyond the average Australian who is struggling.
Thank you, Senator. As in my opening statement, I made the point, we are 10% of a family's expenditure, but that is a critical 10%. And we were 9 and now we're 10. And I don't want to trivialise that 1% because a lot goes into it. And we need to help get groceries down, prices down in Australia, and pass them on to our customers. And that is our commitment. That is our commitment, Chair. And rest assured of our focus on doing that. We are trying to balance that with meaningful employment for our team. And our team also under pressure, as has been rightly pointed out, Chair, and we need to make sure meaningful jobs, meaningful hours are there for our team who do need them. And we're trying to do that as well as treat suppliers fairly and not in any way pressure them because of, you rightly point out, the cost increases they face. So that's the balance. The shareholder angle we look at is in the medium term. It is through the total shareholder return. That is not the short-term constraint. It is getting the rest of that balance right. We always want to measure our business on our shareholder return over 3 to 5 years, which is our key measure of overall performance. But it all needs to be seen in that context. Can we do more, Senator? Yes. Has this process been helpful in the submissions to doing that? Yes. Rest assured of our commitment in this regard.
So, is it fair to suggest, though, that if everyday Australians are taking this hit, and I acknowledge your comments around the shareholder piece being medium term, but shouldn't then there perhaps be a consideration as to whether the shareholder should take a hit in the short term whilst we are in these exceptional circumstances? These aren't normal circumstances that we see ourselves in.
Senator, absolutely. Just by way of context, and I don't want to, again, trivialise because it's so important. If we decided to make no profit and just said we'll go zero profit for the next 2 years, that would, even in a pre-tax, if we gross it back up, that would be $5 difference a week, recognising the family shops 3 times a week. Those are the numbers we are talking to right now. It also gives me the ability, if you don't mind me observing, I don't know a lot about how banks and everyone else do return on equity. I know an awful lot about how grocers work across the world and have worked across the world in grocery. When you look at the productivity of the sector here, before wages, it's called items per labour hour. How many items does a team move per hour of work? This is the most productive grocery sector in the world, and that's a testament to all the people who work in there, not me as the CEO, but all the people who work there. So, we are working very hard within those parameters, but hopefully that gives you some context.
Yeah, well, we have, as Senator Tyrrell noted, some very hard-working Australians that work in your supermarkets, and I have had many members of my family also work in your supermarkets in your organisation, some currently as well. So, I think, the outcomes for those Australians, and you noted that you are Australia's largest private sector employer as well in your opening statement, and that's where my final set of questions go to. Could you give us an insight into what and how much escalating costs have impacted Woolworths, particularly in relation to energy and industrial relations changes, and what that means to grocery prices?
Thank you, Senator. On energy, actually, our overall energy bill has only gone up very, very slightly. That's through material investments in the Internet of Things. Actually, we've gone from 1.2% of Australia's energy to 0.8%. But it's actually been through turning off the lights, as the old adage goes. It's bakers and frozen doors and making sure it's all turned off. Plus, more recently, material investments into solar on the roofs of our stores. So we've kept that number flat, but it's been through CapEx, which is the return on investment kind of scenario we came back to. On wages, our team are under pressure, so I don't want to do anything but own the topic. Our wage increase in F20 2024 was 5.75% plus 0.5% of super, so about 6.25%. It's our number one cost in our stores, and so that's been the number there. Senator Stirl would rightly know the biggest cost increase is actually just the pressure in transportation, and that is just through many factors, including lifestyle and safety and so on, which has been higher than those. And those are costs we use in technology and capital often, and particularly when it gets to supply chain, to make sure we absorb and don't pass on to our customers wherever we can.
Thank you. That's it from me. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Kovacic. Mr Banducci, you've taken some questions on notice as part of the hearing today. I'd just like to let you know that the committee has set Tuesday the 23rd of April as the due date for answers to questions taken on notice. If you need further time, please contact the Secretariat. And I want to thank you for your engagement with this inquiry and your appearance at the committee today. So you go with our thanks.
Thanks, Senator. And I would like to thank the committee for all of their questions and for all the submissions that have been put in. It's been very helpful. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Mr Banducci. And the committee will now suspend for a lunch break and will recommence in half an hour.
Authorised by J. McCall, Australian Greens, Canberra.